And we are live. Welcome back, everybody, to the Deconversionists. I
Hi
am
there.
Elliot, and my co host for tonight is Felicia. Welcome to
Hello,
the
hello.
show, Felicia. How
Yeah,
are you
good.
doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me. Yeah, I am not Alan. Apologies. Alan could not be here this evening, so I will be stepping in, filling in for Alan, and hopefully doing a pretty decent job. And we'll see where it goes. But I think we've got a really interesting subject tonight, and it's pretty interesting to dive into this specific topic.
Yes, tonight our topic is going to be suffering
Mm.
because there is a shitload of it in the world, and there are competing worldviews as to why suffering exists and how to explain it. And what we're going to be talking about tonight is there are two competing explanations for suffering. Now, if you're a Christian, you have this worldview that tries to account for suffering because you have a God that is in control of the world,
Mm.
and therefore you have a lot of potential problems. Like you have to answer the question, why does God allow suffering?
Mhm.
Why does suffering exist? So the competing worldview, the one that I'm coming from, and I imagine that you are as well, is the materialist worldview.
Mm.
Now, the materialist worldview can account for suffering in a much simpler fashion because it doesn't need to use a God to do so. God does not complicate things. So tonight we're going to be discussing this conflict between these two worldviews and what Christians use for their rationalizations versus how we would answer it.
Mhm. I think what's really interesting about this conversation is I think for everyone that we talk with, if we get anyone tonight, we need to really pin down what they think suffering is, because I've noticed that there is quite a few different definitions of what suffering could potentially be. And so when some one person talks about suffering, they may not mean the same exact thing as another person does, and it gets very messy when discussing suffering. And I think we should really pin down people on what suffering actually is, because from my point of view, suffering is not necessarily evil, but definitely prolonged hardships. And so a prolonged hardship could be considered to be suffering. But what does someone else think that is?
Yeah, exactly. It is kind of a difficult thing to define. I guess, there was a Supreme Court ruling. I kind of get a weird analogy here, but I remember from my time taking constitutional law class, the Supreme Court made a ruling on pornography. And when they were asked to, I think, define what exactly that is, they made an interesting statement. They said, well, you know it when you see it. And because like there's a visceral reaction to certain things. And I think suffering, for me at least, like you know it when you see it or when you experience it. Like
Mm,
it's something that causes pain, like at least for me.
mm, mm.
It,
Well, so how about this? How about so is this suffering? Is the unseen, the silent, the quiet homeless people who live out in cars and don't make racket or do public begging or anything like that, make themselves known to be homeless? Are they suffering? Because you wouldn't really know it if you saw it. You'd look at them and you'd think they're just living their lives. You wouldn't even know if they were homeless to begin with. So would you know that was suffering? Would you classify it as suffering? Is it suffering to be struggling like that? Or is that just an economic burden?
that is an excellent question.
Mm.
Now, when I see it, I guess maybe I shouldn't assume, but I do assume, at least partly, that they are going through something that they don't want to be going through. And I guess from the subjective point of view of those people personally, like you'd have to ask them. But if you're going through it, you definitely know it when you see it or experience it, even though you can't necessarily, in all cases, describe it to a third party, like what you're actually feeling, what you're going through. But like there's an internal intuition, or it's very individual and very subjective. But like when you're going through suffering, because if you
Mm.
don't know you're going through suffering, then I assume you're not actually going through suffering.
Mm. Mm. And so I mean, I guess the logical, I mean, the very logical, very easy. very easy conclusion you can make is that suffering is part of the world, is part of human existence in every facet. There isn't a single person that doesn't go through a period of suffering, whether it's some sort of grief or hardship or something like that. And so I think the very easy logical conclusion is that God is a God that desires suffering because I don't know, it's just he likes it.
Yeah, and it comes down to I wrote a chapter about suffering in my book, and what I boiled it down to at the time, because it was about 7 years ago that I wrote this, and obviously my views have evolved like everyone's do over time when you're confronted with more facts and details. But I broke it down to two problems, like within Christianity, if we're dealing with the Christian God. And it's like this: it's who's ultimately responsible for the suffering, and is the suffering in proportion to something? So, like, obviously, if you're a Christian and you believe there's an all-powerful, all-knowing deity who is responsible for creating the world and creating the conditions that we operate under, because most Christians will say, well, humans can't create anything. I mean, we didn't create the world. We didn't create ourselves. We didn't create the rules or the laws of physics or any of those things. So obviously, God would have to ultimately be responsible, and that's a point of contention where you can argue with a lot of Christians because they'll bring up the free will issue, like we create suffering because we chose evil. But the other side of that equation is the proportionality. So if you are a God who has allowed it or designed a universe where this suffering takes place, is it proportional to some kind of a goal or some kind of a purpose? And in my estimation, of course, it's all going to be our own opinion, because that's the only way we can function in the world is through our own perspective. But the amount of suffering in the world, if we can settle on a definition, is so out of proportion to any kind of reasonable objective that it kind of breaks that Christian doctrine apart. Like, why is there so much suffering? Does God have a purpose for it? Like, I can't think of a goal, no matter how hard I try, that justifies the amount. Like, some would be logical, but the amount is incalculable.
Well, if God is Rick Sanchez and suffering is a way he powers his electronics, then that makes sense. It's not morally justified in any sense of the imagination, but there's a reason for it, I guess. Like, it's so hard to come up with anything that's not so utterly absurd, like a Rick Sanchez excuse. To think like, why if this idea is so true, if your God is so true, why this? Like, and it's not even a problem of like natural evils or anything like that. It's a problem of this is just humans interacting with other humans. You know, this is just why are we like this? Why did God make us like this? Is this to form networks of relationships like this that cause edge cases like that? Not even edge cases that cause vast amounts of what we would consider suffering. Why do that? Why create that system in the first place? What is the purpose of that? Especially in the world where it's so unbalanced. I mean, we see all of the suffering that we would label in the world, and then we see people who were basically golden children who have life made and whose suffering could be compared to basically next to nothing compared to what other people in this world go through. And so you sit there and you think, man, what is that's so random? Like, what is the point of that?
Yeah, it really is random, especially when you take the idea of suffering and break it into two different categories. And one would be like natural suffering that we find out in the world that is apart from humans' actions. And then opposed to like suffering that humans cause. So the reason I like to use the word suffering instead of the word evil is because evil, would be something that we do, something that we choose. So a lot of Christian rationalizations revolve around this idea of free will.
Mm.
Well, free will doesn't exist in nature in the same way that it would exist for an individual making decisions. So things like natural disasters. I mean, we just saw an earthquake in Venezuela over the last week that killed somewhere between 1 and 2,000, or was it? Do you remember what the
It was in the thousands. I remember that much. It was terrible.
It was a tremendous number. Yeah. Now that's not something that humans did to each other. That's not something you can blame on evil. That's something that happens in the natural world just completely randomly.
Mm-hmm.
Or where I live, I'm in the middle of Kansas, and we've got the risk of tornadoes quite regularly. And we had a town just to the south of me here, a number of years ago, was like completely wiped out. There was a moderate death toll. The town had to rebuild practically from scratch. Now that's something that comes out of nowhere. It's totally unexpected. It's unpredictable. So these natural disasters, like, they create their own levels of suffering that have nothing to do with the problem of evil. And then when you go into like the medical sphere, the sheer volume of diseases that exist in the world that aren't even like viruses and bacteria, or things that can happen to you, like from the natural world, just things that happen in your own body, just conditions are seemingly countless. Like, for example, just take childhood cancer.
Mm-hmm.
So many children die every year from something that they had absolutely no hand in, that most Christians would classify these children as completely innocent. That's something that, if you believe in God, you have to grapple with that. And you have to come up with a reason just to keep your sanity. Like, why God would allow this, why God would create a world where this could happen, and then actually have it happen. Just millions and millions of children who haven't even reached that magical, mythical age of accountability where most Christian doctrine will say, now you're accountable for your actions. You've reached a certain age where you can comprehend the difference between right and wrong. Like, they're before that age.
Yep. I also wonder, because you could consider cancer to be, maybe a natural sort of calamity, if you will. But Isaiah 45:7, I make peace, I create calamity or evil or disaster or woe, or whichever translation you want to use. But God directly in the Bible claims authorship over this stuff. So, I mean, you still have to account for that. You still have to answer for that. And I don't believe there's a very good answer or a compelling answer for people who are outside of the faith to latch onto and say, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. You have to be fully within the theological circle to really latch onto something like that and say, oh, well, God claims authorship over this, but it's for a good reason. It's for a good cause. It's it's the Stockholm syndrome of theology, wherein you're just being abused constantly, but eventually you figure out, oh, well, they're doing it because he loves me. Well, really? Well, you don't get the living crap beat out of you if somebody loves you, Like, it doesn't happen constantly. So maybe there's some issues there. Maybe God itself really does just like suffering and pain and just vile, reprehensible things, because that's just the way the story is constructed.
Yeah, and for I don't even know how many years, we have this term called a theodicy within Christianity, and I'm unsure whether it takes place in other faiths, but it's this idea that we have to come up with a justification to reconcile the idea between an all-powerful, all-knowing, loving God and what we see in the world. And at least as far as I'm aware, it's been these theodicies have been projects that countless theologians have worked on for the last probably 2,000 years at least, after the birth of Christianity proper. And I want to get my band.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you because I just thought about this. But you bring up the idea of theodicy, and the idea of a theodicy of soul building, of the soul journey, through suffering, through evils, through struggling through obstacles. But I think of Ezekiel 8:18. Mine eyes shall not spare, neither will I have pity, yet will I not hear them. There's no pity. There's no listening there. That's not a soul building journey. That's not a theodicy. That's just God saying, do this or else. There's no making you into a better person. That's not even like a boot camp sergeant screaming at you, trying to get you into military shape. That is either do this or perish. There's no. That's the thing about theodicy that's always confused me, because God itself says in the Bible, I don't care. Like, I'm not going to listen to you. I'm not going to show you any pity. And it's like, wow, that's not soul building. That's not a soul building journey. That's not theodicy. That's theology itself being a form of suffering.
Right. Now, if you're a Christian and you're happening upon this live stream, we have the link pinned in the comments. If you yourself have a theodicy that you have constructed, or you have an excuse for suffering, or you have a reason why you think God allows it, we would love to hear from you. You can go ahead and jump in. If you, preferably if you have a webcam, for the time being, we're not allowing people to join us that don't have webcams. We like to keep it very personal and just have a conversation. And I've found it's harder to do that if you just have your audio on. So if you are, in fact, a Christian, you're listening to this, you have an excuse, you have a reason for why suffering happens, and you've got a webcam, go ahead and join us. We would love to talk to you. That is literally why we are here tonight.
And don't forget to like and subscribe, because we're so close to a good subscription number. It'd be really awesome.
Yeah, we are just a handful of subscribers away from 4,000 subscribers. And obviously that is not the ultimate goal. We would like 100,000, but you can help us tonight get just to 4,000. That would be great. So yes, like and subscribe.
And let me ask you this, because Proverbs, oh gosh, it's Proverbs 1 something, but I can recall part of the quote. It's, I will laugh at your calamity. I will mock when your fear cometh. And they, being pretty much everyone suffering, will call upon me, but I will not answer. I mean, like, man, can you tell me just like that God is having a laugh at your suffering? He's laughing at calamity. I don't know what to say to that. Like, how does a theodicy solve that keeps the omnibenevolent portion of God? Because when I was a Catholic way back when, I never believed God was omnibenevolent. Always believed in omnipresence, always there, but never omnibenevolent. I mean, he loved you, but he didn't always love you. I mean, Proverbs 1, no, he's gonna laugh at you if you're not a believer at the end of days and he doesn't show himself. So, like, cool, I guess. But it's so hard to reconcile suffering with the Christian God. It's so hard to reconcile suffering with any omnipotent being. I'm sorry, omnibenevolent being. So
yeah,
I don't understand why. I personally, because it's been over 20 years now, I just personally don't understand why and how people can latch onto this idea and then defend it so vigorously, you know?
I think they're forced to defend it because it's such a huge problem. And it's probably caused, I wish we had statistics on ex-Christians. I know there have been a few studies, but it's kind of an individual pursuit from a few social scientists that have tried to quantify deconversions, the reasons why people leave the faith. And I think probably one of the largest, if not the largest reason that people leave the faith is because of the problem of suffering. It's such a huge issue. It's such a huge red flag that you have a God and the God knows everything and the God has all power. He can do anything. He can create any kind of environment that he wants or any kind of world or universe. He can create the rules just by speaking them into existence. And yet he has allowed or even desired, definitely created the one that we're living in here that contains this level of suffering. And you know, we're so many thousands of years into recorded human history, And there is no let up in sight to this level of sorrow and suffering. And so, if you're a Christian, especially, you have to reconcile that just for the sake of your own mental health. And so, I think they're forced to do that if they want to remain a Christian or if they care. Of course, there's a lot of them that just don't care.
Unfortunately, there are very many Christians out there that just don't care. That they'll do what I did when I was a Catholic, and they'll say, it's a mystery. I don't know. I don't understand it. Maybe one day I will, but maybe God doesn't want me to understand it. And it's like, really? God doesn't want you to understand him, but he wants a relationship with you. Can you not see the problem with that? That's weird.
That is a serious problem because God gave you a brain to understand at least enough to know who he is and what he wants from you, but then he doesn't give you that capacity to understand him. Like, I wouldn't want to be in a relationship with someone I didn't understand. Like, that's kind of a prerequisite for any kind of human relationship. But then when it comes to a heavenly father, like, then it all breaks down. And then I no longer need to understand God. I'm not capable of understanding him. Like, why do I want to be in a relationship with a being like that? Because if I don't understand him, then how do I know that I can trust him? He could very well stab you in the back. I mean, you have this, if you're a Christian, you have this idea that, you've accepted Jesus, you've been saved, and then someday you're going to go to heaven and you're not going to go to hell. How do you know that? If you don't understand the mind of God, how can you be certain that once you get to where you think you're going, he's not going to be like, psych, you misunderstood everything. You don't understand me. You got it wrong. Into hell you go. Like, the prerequisite here is that we actually understand God. Because if you think you understand God once, then how do you not understand God himself?
So we seem to have a Christian in the chat, maybe. He says, God can't be real if he doesn't make sense to me. But we're not making the argument that God isn't real if he doesn't make sense to me. But we are making the argument, or at least I believe Elliot's making the argument, that I can't be in a relationship with God if I don't understand God. Because if I don't understand, if something is incomprehensible to me, how can I have a relationship with it? How can I, if I meet a random, let's say I meet let's say that I discover a deep sea underwater creature that has never been discovered before, and it behaves so erratically, so outside the norm for underwater creatures that I have no comprehensible way of predicting its actions, of understanding what its intentions may be, of understanding what the outcomes might be. And I'm supposed to study this thing safely and interact with it? No, I can't do that. If I have no way of comprehending it, then there's no way of me approaching it in any sort of safe manner. I've got to warn other people about the incomprehensible metaphysical horror that is around me, not tell people that it loves me and it just really wants to give me a nice, warm, gentle hug, but to tell people, stay away from this thing because it's weird and it will eat you, but sometimes it won't, and it'll give you a hug, and it's really weird and I don't understand it, and we've been studying it for 2,000 years and we still don't get it. So it's not so much that God doesn't exist, but it's more like God is a incomprehensible metaphysical cosmic horror show that I can't understand its motivations. I can't understand its wants, its desires. I can't understand how it's going to execute things, and I can't understand that if I can't understand something's motivations, I can't understand that. I can't know that the actions I take in support of whatever goals it says it has is actually going to be beneficial to both of us. There's no way for me to know that.
Yeah, that would make for an extremely dangerous creature if you encountered something like that and you couldn't comprehend it. Like, you would want to get as far away as possible from it and study it from a safe distance. Unfortunately, that's not something that you can do with God. Like, God is omnipresent. He's all powerful. He's all knowing. Like, you can't get away from this God to take some time to understand him. Like, your best course of action would be to, keep your distance if you could. So, I mean, how is God any different from an extremely dangerous wild animal that we don't understand? It's a scary thought.
It's a weird thought. It's a very weird thought. But you're welcome to jump onto the show. There's a show link in the chat, and contest me on that point. I would love to actually discuss that. But it's God to me, because as a former Catholic, God to me is, and I studied, just to give you a brief overview, Elliot, I studied Thomistic metaphysics, and I was on a priestly track towards Mundalene and seminary and work like that within Catholicism. So I was a bit more serious in my studies in terms of the scholarly academic side of things, rather than just, the evangelical Bible thump college type stuff. And so from my point of view, God is metaphysics, right? So God is when I believed, God was metaphysics. God was everything, everywhere, at all times. We are of God, and so is reality. And it's a all-encompassing alpha and omega thing. Imagine the sheer amount of terror that knowing something like that would cause, to just truly believe that not just the air particles you breathe, but the very fabric of reality that suspends air particles is God, right? And like, just imagine walking around in that sort of mindset, thinking, wow, it could just, this metaphysical cosmic horror could strip away reality from directly around me and make me not exist in a moment's notice. Now, that never happens. And I believe that is a part of the growing amount of evidence in my own personal life that's, God's not real. But it also means that God, from the Catholic perspective, could just stop suffering. He could just help with stuff. He could give people inspiration, not even directly stop it, but he could give people the inspiration to help each other to end suffering. But he doesn't even do that. It gives us inspiration to have different ideas which conflict constantly and cause even more and greater suffering. I mean, how much of this world is such a horror show because we have different ideas about how things should happen and how things should work, and we conflict with each other all the time on this and compete with each other and eat up resources, out competing each other, just to cause the loser a little bit more suffering, and the winner can have, I don't know, a private jet. Like, what the hell are we doing? Or 10, or private space satellite companies, whatever. I'm not.
And apparently, eventually, their own private planet, if they can get off of this one, and leave us all behind to suffer. It's remarkable. Yeah, but this is the flip side of this is the explanation for suffering that exists in the, I don't want to say atheist worldview, because I don't believe atheism is its own worldview. So before anybody, jumps on that, because I hear that a lot, the atheist worldview.
Atheistic framework.
Yeah. So I guess I would say the materialist worldview. So the way I view the world is in terms of like natural law. It's not like an official term, but, suffering is explained by the materialist, natural law worldview as like this. We weren't created, we weren't intended, we happened, and we are struggling for survival against forces that do not create a hospitable environment for us. Like, we're essentially an accident that evolved, and we're competing with every other living thing, including the natural environment. Like, we have to fight natural disasters. Like, we survive in spite of them, not because of them. And so this obviously creates like a lot of things that are painful, because we're struggling for survival on a daily basis. And I mean, you can see this in the animal world. It's nothing but a psychopathic framework of, I need resources and I have a compulsion to reproduce, and I'm going to do so at the cost of every other living thing around me without any thought to their own well-being. And because we are in an environment like that, it's going to create a ton of suffering. We are in a competitive, hostile environment trying to survive the best way that we can.
Hmm.
And that explains the problem of suffering in a far straighter line than if you create a God to explain the universe. Once you do that, once you create a God, now you immediately have plot holes and problems that you have to explain, contradictions, if you will, because now you have to try to come up with a reason why the God is allowing this environment to exist in the way that it is. And it falls apart at every step, because every time you create a new excuse or a new rationalization, you get a new problem or a new plot hole that has to be explained. Because we can go all the way back to Genesis. So, well, I'll let you respond to that before I get into like the curse.
Yeah, I think so. I don't necessarily hold to natural law in terms of like I agree with it. I don't necessarily hold to that. I hold to more of a relational point of view with everything. So, what could be described as a relational versus a substance ontology. And so everything to me is in a network of relations. It's a web of relations. And so that web of relations that we have as human beings naturally depends upon us surviving, and individual survival is paramount for the species to survive. But unfortunately, that creates conflict within the species itself. We're one unified race, but we're not one unified person. We're individuals all trying to get resources. And so that relational web naturally creates both an abstract concept called morals and the abstract concept we call suffering, because it is a constant struggle to be both independently us and also part of the collective web. And so that's really what I sort of view it as. It gets a little bit more complicated than that, because I mean, obviously I'm sort of giving the very compressed version here of my whole relational atheism framework. But essentially it comes down to a web of relations. Even if you drill on down to like, the cellular level, it's still a network of relations, if you will. So I feel like suffering is just a natural emergent phenomenon of such a competing network, a self-propagating, self-competing network. And so I also think morals are the same thing. But in terms of suffering, I think it's all. I think it's all just because, I mean, we want to live. That's at the end of the day, we want to live, and then at the very baseline of us wanting to live gets extrapolated to where are we right now in society. Well, we're at this point in our society, and so we strive for bigger and better things to make ourselves seem more in society than what is really necessary, and so it ends up creating even more suffering, even more strife. And what's, I guess, not really ironic, though I guess maybe sickening about the human condition, if you will, is that we're talking about this, and it is the problem of suffering comes from such an extremely privileged position to be discussing it. We talk about suffering as if it is something that we are causally disconnected from, but we're not, because we are part of this web of relation of human beings on this planet. And the things we do, the inactions we take, directly causes suffering for somebody else. And so we're very privileged to be able to sit here and discuss this, but we don't realize, either as Christians or non-Christians, that our inactions are causing more problems than they're solving. And God never talks about that. God never speaks about your inactions causing problems for somebody in, North America if you're in Israel. God never talks about somebody suffering in China because you've decided to take inaction in England and didn't pass a relief bill or something like that. Nobody ever discusses that, because suffering extends far beyond just you and me. It extends far beyond just an individual who's homeless and in the winter in New York City and they have to sleep in the subway stations to stay warm. It extends far beyond that. It's a very robust, interconnected relationship that arises from it. And I think if we spent more time discussing how we, as people who see ourselves as disconnected from these problems, really understood that we were actually connected to them, I think we would do more to reduce suffering in this world than being Christian ever could.
I think that perspective speaks to the primitive or archaic nature of the Bible itself.
Mm.
Like, there's a reason why in the Bible God never discusses any of the things that you just mentioned, because it was written in a context of a culture that was extremely ethnocentric and did not even have a conceptualization of like a global community or mentality.
Oh
Like,
yeah.
they had a known world that it pretty much ended at the Mediterranean in a
Mhm.
way. And they couldn't even begin to imagine that there's, six other continents and there's people on them, and that their actions could have consequences for those people. And if they could have, they probably wouldn't have cared, because at that time and place, it was all about the tribe.
Yeah.
And like, the Bible was written for one particular tribe, and the actions that God gives them to take were very essentially sociopathic, where you move into this land, kill all these people, and take it for yourselves, and own slaves from the heathens that surround you. Like, they were so far removed from where we are today, where we understand that we live in a global community and a larger society and a larger human race, where actions have consequences for everyone. And they so if you put the Bible in that context, it makes perfect sense why God never would have even addressed anything like that.
Oh yeah, in context, absolutely. I mean, go put it in the proper historical context, and I understand why they wrote the way they wrote. But put it in the modern context, where people tell me this should be affecting me personally today, and I think you're absolute lunatic, because the Bible doesn't. Because the Bible was written at a time when people took a dump in the desert and wiped their butts with clumps of wet sand, and that's not to say that they were bad people for doing that, but that's to say it was a different time period with different understandings of things like hygiene. If the Bible truly wanted to be across cultures, across time, across everything, it would have mentioned maybe like basic hygienic actions you could take. Not just go bury your scat outside of the camp, but like maybe we should invent some way of cleansing ourselves after we do this, right? Because there's certain issues that arise, maybe food contamination or something. God could have said something like that, but he didn't. So I think that really speaks again to the time period it was written in. It was written for a specific people who didn't know better. I don't blame them. They couldn't have possibly known, right? I'm not judging them as individuals, as writers, but I am judging people who tell me this is absolutely true and you must abide by it today. Well, no, I'm sorry. I completely and utterly disagree with that notion, because that's to my eyes is utter lunacy.
Yeah, and I do judge people that use the Bible today. Like, I can understand in that context, thousands of years ago that they're writing from, and withhold some judgment there, because they just didn't know any better.
Mhm.
But when you fast forward to 2026 and you've got millions of Christians that are using this book now, a book that does not work in 2026 because of these tribalistic ideals, like, then you are worthy of some judgment, because you're trying to live your life in a way that only worked in, 1000 BC for that particular tribe. So it's such an anachronistic concept to be using an ancient writing in a global society. It just doesn't work.
And I think I think it sort of goes to my point that to the topic of the show, that God wants incalculable suffering. God enjoys incalculable suffering, because if we are taking the Bible literally, if God is a real character and has some sort of real effect on the world, God would have told us about sanitary practices. He would have explained, hey, you need to wash your hands after you wipe your butt, right? Like, he would have said something about that. He would have said anything about that. He would have given us maybe warnings about getting infections after getting cut. He would have said, here's a thing called antiseptic. Use it. It'll reduce suffering. You won't be spreading E. coli or other infections into cuts. You won't be spreading E. coli into your food and hurting yourself. You wouldn't even have to call it E. coli. Would have to use ancient metaphorical language. That's fine, or analogical language. That's fine. But none of that's there. That's and that would have, given how many years the Bible over how many years the Bible was written and how old some of the Old Testament actually is, that would have reduced an incalculable amount of suffering in the world if it had just dropped a little hint like that, but it doesn't. And I think that is one of the more damning things about the Bible, is that it does nothing to reduce suffering whatsoever in that manner.
Yeah, and there's 100 different directions that we can go from the Old Testament, the details that caused suffering or that God could have prevented by just simply giving a simple command like that. But I've over time have gotten really fatigued by arguing with Christians over those specific points, because we can get so deep into the details that we lose the larger perspective. Like, for example, how many times have we watched slavery debates between an ex-Christian and a current Christian? They try to justify slavery, how slavery in the Bible wasn't like, modern day slavery from like the Civil War period. And what I found is to be very useful is to simply go all the way back to the beginning and say, you know what? It doesn't matter that God commanded genocide or that God approved of slavery or that God didn't put "thou shalt not rape" in the 10 Commandments. If I go all the way to the beginning, God literally invented death itself. What could be worse than that?
Well, I know something that could be worse than that, and this goes into some point I was trying to say for nearly the end of the show, but I mean we're getting pretty decently there. So God invented death itself. He put essentially a finite clock on our ability to discover him and understand him and form a relationship with him, and his son, Jesus Christ, and whatever, right? So he put a timer on that, on our frail, mortal human minds. In a world where we're guaranteed to suffer in some form or another, in a world where we're guaranteed to question, even if we were believers, to question the existence of God during our times of suffering. And then we die. But not only do we die, the world is going to end according to the Bible. We're going to stop being a thing according to the Bible. Revelation is going to happen. The rapture will, I guess, if you want to go down the rapture route, will happen. And so God not only put a timer on our individual lives, he put a timer on all of existence to come to know him and to love him and worship him and respect him. That's a huge problem for the problem of suffering for the Christian, because in order for that to come true, first off, the gospel has to be taught to the world, and it has to be understood by everyone in the world, all nations. And then when that happens, here's the problem. Nothing guarantees that everyone's going to accept that word, that everyone's going to accept that message. People are going to fight back against that message, push back against that message, reject that message. Many people, in fact, will. You have Muslims, you have Jews, you have non-Christians, Shintoism, Hindus, Buddhists, all this other competing stuff that will utterly reject the word of God. And so during the time between the nations all hearing the word of God and the rapture, you're going to have a prolonged series of suffering. You must necessarily have a prolonged set of suffering in order to come to the end of times. And then you're going to come to the end of times with people who are guaranteed to just not believe and not repent and think you're full of nonsense. And they're just going to be thrown into hell for eternity, to suffer for eternity. So your own theology demands that you cause the world to suffer in the name of God. That's monstrous, if you ask me. I think the directive to preach to the world and spread the word of God towards the world so that the rapture can come is a monstrous way to approach life, because it's guaranteed to cause people to suffer, as opposed to, say, taking a humanist point of view and saying, hey, let me try to reduce suffering, let me try to reduce harm, let me just try that instead. Because forcing people to to hear the word and then bring about infinite suffering for the people who still refuse sounds far more monstrous than anything any one individual could possibly do.
Yeah, this idea that there are currently something like 7 or 8 billion people on the planet, this idea that God has multiplied or allowed the human race to multiply, especially considering that the vast majority of them are not going to get the right message under Christianity and are going to end up in hell. This goes all the way back to the beginning again, because I think that the genesis of the suffering is ironically in Genesis. If you're a Christian, Adam and Eve do this original sin, and we see the free will excuse. They chose evil. So, okay, so they need to be punished. So God comes down and he judges them and he curses them. Now, we can debate the curse itself because it makes absolutely no sense. Because if you read the actual curse, and I would encourage any Christian watching this to go back to Genesis and read exactly what the curse says. The curse does not include it. It was written from a perspective of people that were living in the BC era because they didn't know what diseases were. Just for one example, like none of these things are in the curse. God curses the ground and he tells Adam and Eve, you're going to die. That is pretty much the sum total of it. However, that aside, after you want to cram every single bad thing in the natural world into those verses, which it isn't there, that aside, God had the opportunity to do one of two things: to either fix the problem immediately, forgive Adam and Eve, and put everything back to where it was before. He had the free will to do that, and he was all-powerful being. He could have done it if he desired to do so, but he desired to not do that. He desired to curse the world, and then this is the big one. Then, instead of limiting the damage to the two people who sinned, God went ahead and allowed billions and billions more to come into the world after it was cursed. There is no concept of damage control when it comes to the Christian God. He wanted maximum damage. He's like, okay, I'm going to destroy my perfect creation that I called good on day one. And I'm going to rewrite the laws of physics to allow for death and allow for suffering and entropy. And then I'm going to open the floodgates and I'm going to allow, at a minimum, 8 billion more human beings to come into this world. Like, why? That is a problem that you as a Christian have to deal with. Why would God not limit the damage? Why would he allow 8 billion human beings post-curse, post-invention of death, then knowing that most of them would end up in hell? Like, that's the whole premise of my show tonight, is God desires incalculable suffering because he refuses to limit the damage and, in contrast, actually tries to maximize it.
I mean, it's so... For me, the problem is not that the Bible contains suffering, because every human story contains suffering. Every good human story contains suffering. If there's a story about if there's a story that doesn't contain suffering, all you've done is write a self-insert Poe into a fan fiction. Then who cares, right? But the problem is that the biblical suffering is repeatedly placed inside divine command, divine judgment, divine glory, hardening, wrath, deadlines, eternal punishment. That's not the action of a godly being. That's the action of a character forcing suffering that humans see in the world and making it structurally necessary for the plot. It's reverse engineering real human suffering into a narrative story and trying to make sense of why bad shit happens. And that's really what the Bible is at the end of the day. It's a story. It's the only thing that makes sense, is that it's just a narrative story we came up with to help us understand, why does the world suck sometimes? Doesn't mean it's real, doesn't mean it's true, it just means it sounded nice.
Yeah, it's a perfect microcosm of humans attempting to make sense of what we're going through. Now, Speaking of theodicies, the Bible actually contains a famous theodicy, and it's called the Book of Job. And it's a story. Obviously, it's a story. I believe it's a story. You believe it's a story, but it is a story designed to try to make sense of one man's suffering. And I mean, we can discuss like why it happened. We, as the perspective of the omniscient narrator, can see the premise of the story. You know, God is essentially engaged in a wager with the devil over whether Job will break under extreme suffering and you know, renounce God essentially. But Job doesn't know that in the story. So Job goes through these trials and tribulations, this point, and from his perspective, pointless suffering, and he doesn't know why. And it goes on to chapter after chapter after chapter of these dialogues he has with his friends, trying to understand, why is God doing this to me? And it's interesting that he assumes God is the one doing it to him for much of the dialogue. But in the end, Job gets to dialogue directly with God about why it's happening to him. And he essentially poses that question to God. And God's response is very telling. God tells him, essentially, sort of, I don't care. Or it's not your problem. It's none of your business. It's like your job is to just take it. Just take it and not ask why and not question it. And, you know, I think that might explain the perspective a lot of Christians have when it comes to this. Like, I don't know the reason why. I'm just going to trust God. Why? Well, because Job trusted God and he wasn't allowed to ask why it was happening. So a reason is never actually given to Job. Job ends his story never finding out, as far as we know, that this was all God just living out a wager he had with the devil, which, from the human perspective of, especially from a third party who doesn't, you know, is not a Christian, is like the worst possible reason you could imagine. Like a God, just for ego purposes, decided to grind some guy into dust because someone bet him to do it. And you're not allowed to ask why, and you're not allowed to ever get a reason. So now you have to just continue to live your life with no rationalizations whatsoever. It's almost like living on faith. Like, well, just take it on faith.
I mean,
God is a mystery.
Well, that's the entire story of Job. It's just take it on faith, because doesn't God eventually come down and tell Job, after Job's whining after an unknown told number of horrible things he suffers through? I think at some point he just randomly starts getting sores for no reason. And then God sort of comes down as a whirlwind and says, "Oh yeah, were you there when I created everything? Huh? Like, okay, cool. Why me though? Like, does that you didn't answer anything, dude? Like, you just stroked your own ego. Like, what's going on? It's so weird that Job is at least not let in on the joke or let in on the wager and saying, hey, listen, you were one of my most loyal, and I wanted to make sure that Satan understood the depths of my power. And I'm really sorry for putting you through all this." But instead of doing anything like that, he challenges him. He doesn't give Job any sort of answers. He frames Job's complaining of his own suffering as challenging or condemning God. Would you disannul my judgment? Would you condemn me that you might be righteous? Like, chill out, Yahweh. Like, smoke some weed or something, dude. Like, I'm just going through a rough patch, man. What's going on?
Yeah, it is remarkable that as far as I'm aware, maybe I haven't read the Bible enough in recent years, but as far as I'm aware, this is the one time when it takes a stab at its own theodicy. This is the biblical theodicy. The conclusion is, it's not your place to question it. It's just your place to suffer. Like, okay, so we never actually get a good reason from God, even when God is directly asked why.
And if you take Job just as a story, if you take Job as just as a parable, which it is, it's a parable, then fine. I get it. You're just trying to explain to people suffering happens, and it's not your place to question why you suffer, because God's not going to answer you. He's not going to give you an answer you like or understand or know or can reason about. You're just going to suffer. And eventually the suffering ends. Now, for Job, it ends in the weirdest way possible, in that his children, he gets just new children. Like, the old ones are still dead. But he gets new kids, so that's cool, I guess, sort of. But, like, if you just take it as a parable, fine, whatever. If you take it as literally real, you got issues, man. You've got unresolved issues that you need to go through, because that's horrible to think that not only does God exist, but he just wagers your moral life for funsies. It's horrific. To have your suffering be a wager is like, oh, what is that movie? What is the movie with the oh gosh, the one with the oranges, the orange market, in the corner of the orange market, and they bet that they can ruin a dude's life over a dollar bill. Oh no! Oh my gosh! I can't believe I'm forgetting. It was like with Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy, I think. No. Oh.
Unfortunately, I don't think I've seen it.
Oh, it's an older movie. Oh, I can't remember it. Yeah, I can't remember the name of the movie, but they go and they ruin this dude's life over a wager of $1, and I believe the movie itself was sort of inspired by the Book of Job. But essentially what they wager is they could ruin someone's life, and they could build someone else's life up. That's how powerful they are, and they do this wager over $1. Trading Places, that's what it is. Thank you so much.
Oh, okay.
I could not think of it. It's such a good movie too. I just could not think of it. Oh my gosh. And it's got so many Job-like beats, and it is a fantastic movie about how suffering is in a large part out of our control, and stronger, more powerful things can absolutely control our suffering and be in charge of our suffering. In the scope of the Bible, yeah, it's God's fault. It's absolutely God's fault. Now, in the scope of human political discourse, it's a different conversation. But in the scope of particularly this show, I mean, Job's suffering wasn't Job's fault. God just decided, that's what I'm going to do.
Yeah. It was not a result of Job's free will. Like the most common response to the problem of suffering is that we have chosen that path in some way, whether it was the free will exercised by Adam and Eve in the garden that has, resulted in us suffering, and then we make further choices in life that cause, like, we choose evil. Like, none of that had anything to do with Job. Like, that was something that happened to Job, not something that Job did himself. And what you mentioned Job's children. That's an interesting point, because like I said before, once you create a God as an explanation, you very quickly develop more and more plot holes and more things that need explanations. And every one of these Bible stories has got plot holes just like that. We never get a story in the Bible that makes perfect sense and doesn't result in questions that can't be answered. And just on the point of Job's children, so he loses all his children during this wager. Essentially, God or the devil kills them all, and in the end, Job is going to be made whole, and God gets him more children. And it's like, so the children are just a commodity; they're a possession. It's like, okay, Job gets all his cattle back, and then Job gets his children back. Well, they're different children. It doesn't make up for the ones that he lost if he really cared about those individual children. The promise of more doesn't fix it. They're just possessions.
It gets so much worse than that, because we're focusing entirely on Job and the parable of Job. Job's children died. They didn't choose that freely. His children were people. They were actual people who died to teach Job a lesson. And they didn't matter in the slightest to anyone. Their own free will was completely wiped away from them because God decided to let them die. Their entire story is just missed in the parable of Job. Their
Right.
entire free will is missed. Their theodicy is missed. It's gone. It's just like, oh, well, poor Job, he suffered so much. His kids died. They were human beings. They were people. They had opinions. They wanted to live lives.
Yeah.
I mean, assuming, that they were real, whatever, right? I'm just granting that. But like, gosh, that is often just so overlooked. And you talk about free will here, and I know a lot of Christians will give the excuse of free will as being a cause for suffering, but I'm reminded of the first letter of Peter, 2:18, not 2:18, 2:8. So what's the actual word? They stumble at the word, being disobedient, whereunto they were also appointed. And God, so not only do you stumble, but God appoints stumbling and then punishes the stumbling that he appointed, according to Peter. So, I mean, unless you want to contradict Peter there, Christians, that's a little bit of an issue. God,
Right.
Not only did you stumble, God appointed the stumbling.
Yeah. So we've got a couple of guests in the backstage here. We've got Josh Patterson. I'm going to bring in Josh, and then we've got Brother Andrew. I'm going to bring Josh in first. We'll talk a little bit, and then Andrew, we'll add you in a few minutes here. Josh, welcome back to the show. How's it going tonight?
I'm well. How are you, Elliot?
Good enough to be here.
Right on. Forgive my I didn't realize you could see my very sparse office. I'm in the process of moving, and it looks rather ugly.
It looks totally fine to me. Yeah. If you hadn't brought it to our attention, I wouldn't have noticed anything negative.
Right on. Cool.
So how long have you been listening tonight?
Like 10 minutes. I saw the theme and I was like, I like the suffering question. It's like the one that drives some of the biggest like questions that I've asked theologically, and so I don't know. I thought I'd give my 2 cents.
Well, let's hear it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so I was enjoying the conversation you all were having with Job, and I remember actually getting in a bit of an argument with people when I was in Bible college, because we're talking about the ending of Job being redacted. So like it was written much later.
Oh, okay.
No.
And I was arguing that Job was better before the redaction happened because it was a better reflection of life. Like sometimes shit just happens and it sucks. But anyway, all of the points that you were talking about, I fully concede. It's probably one of my least favorite books in the Bible. But for me, I think it's really important, the kind of question that you guys are asking, because the problem of evil for me was like the number one thing, and I think the biggest reason that theists have for becoming atheists. Like it's the best argument against classical theism, hands down. And I don't think classical theism has a way to answer the question in any kind of meaningful sense. Because from like, if you go the deterministic route, like Felicia, you were talking about, referencing Peter, or maybe I think of someone like Calvin, where God predestines and preordains everything.
Yeah,
then God is
the first letter of Peter, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So then God is quite literally the author of evil, and that God, in my opinion, is a moral monster and deserves atheism. Like that is the proper response. But then with the free will, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, I mean, yes, assuming that your atheism is because you think the omnibenevolent God can't exist. Otherwise, you're actually being more agnostic theist if you're saying a God exists. So I just wanted to clarify the atheist position. That's all.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry if I'm being flippant with that.
No, nothing to be sorry about. It's just clarifying, man.
Yeah, but I ditched the deterministic perspective. I don't like it. I also don't like the free will defense that a lot of classical theists will bring up as well, where it's like, oh, well, like God doesn't want robots, so people have free will, and then you can do people do whatever they want. And the reason I don't like that is because it means God could prevent genuine evil and chooses not to, which in my taking on things makes God morally responsible for said evil. So it's rather problematic. Like, if we, say I went to the pool with my buddy Tripp, and his kids were there, and this is a terrible example, so forgive me, but like playing in the pool with his kids, and I was going to be a dick and hold one of the kids underwater. And Tripp sat by as a dad and was like, I don't want to interrupt Josh's free will, so I'm just going to let him drown my child. I could stop him, but Josh has free will. We're going to let it happen. Tripp would not win Dad of the Year by any stretch of the imagination, right? And Tripp would probably be implicated in some kind of neglect at the very least. So I think
negligent homicide,
yeah. So I think none of those options are sufficient. And again, I think the God who could prevent genuine evil and chooses not to is not worthy of worship, and would not be. I'm an atheist to that God as well.
So, Josh, let me ask you a question. How do you feel about the Catholic Thomistic God that's not omnibenevolent but is omnipresent? It is the metaphysical everything. What are your takes on something like that?
Yeah, so the direction I go on, and Elliot's heard my spiel before, but on days when I feel like I can be a theist, the direction I go is actually process theology.
Process theology, yeah.
Yep.
I've read Jay Ord quite a bit. He's interesting.
Oh, cool. Yeah. Tom's actually a friend of mine. Tom's great. I like him a lot. He's shaped a lot of my thinking on days when I feel like being a theist. But so you're already going to be familiar with what I'm going to say then, because I like the omnipresence bit. I think that works. I'm a panentheist, so I believe that God is in the universe is in God. So I'm fine with omnipresence, but I reject omnipotence in favor of God being all-loving. So a very Ord notion, I'll say God is essentially and necessarily love, and because of that, because of God's nature or essence, there are things that God simply can't do, and coercion is one of them, because love is non-coercive, and so in my perspective, therefore, God cannot prevent genuine evil unilaterally, but necessitates creaturely cooperation in order to do so. And there's a whole lot more metaphysical assumptions built into that. But that's, I think, the best, if we're going to be so bold as to claim we can solve the problem of evil, that would be, I think, the best way, is the way that Tom does it. But I'm not, that satisfies me like maybe 60% of the time.
So if you don't mind me explaining why I'm not a process theologian.
Absolutely.
So I actually started off with Catholicism, obviously earlier on, going into seminary type of work, looking towards, and I was told by my sponsor, I had a sponsor willing to pay for everything at the time, that I should keep an eye towards Rome and studying in the Vatican itself. And then I walked away from all of that. I eventually found myself reading the works of Carlo Rovelli in relational quantum mechanics, and I started to think, what if I could apply the interaction first methodology to everything? And that's and I had also read Dr. Ward's stuff as well, and I started to realize that's not a God for me. That's just an abstraction. That is just how things work. And so I just walked away from the idea of a God at that point. So that's sort of what my journey had been like. But in terms of like process theologians, you guys are pretty cool. I dig you.
Right on. I think the critique is well taken. And I mean, even within the process community, there's the debate between like, are we talking about an agential being called God, or is this, because David Ray Griffin, who is Tom's teacher, had his whole like supernatural, or what was it, reenchantment without supernaturalism. So any kind of God concept is just, to your point, a part of the natural order in creation. So yeah, it's very well taken. And I think maybe that's why it's appealing to me, because it's like, all of these other pictures have fallen off for me so hardcore that if there's something resembling God, this is the picture I think that's the best one. But on most days I'm a radical theologian, where, in the thought of like, death of God stuff, but then pushing it further into like phenomenology, hermeneutics. John Caputo is one of my favorites, who, says things like God doesn't exist, but God is an insistence, provocation, and invitation.
He writes some very interesting work. I have to give his stuff more reads, but from what I've read, it's been interesting.
Yeah, and like he rightly, to use Derrida's language, rightly passes as an atheist. So I don't know. My contribution to the suffering conversation maybe is lacking, because I'm like, I mostly agree with you. Like, here's one way to do it.
It's not really lacking. It makes sense from a process theologian's point of view about why suffering exists, because it's basically out of the hands of God. Like, he wants to, your God wants to help, but he's also limited. And when you start placing limits on the concept of a God, to me, it's not a God anymore. To me, it's just this explanation. Which, fine, okay, you can have that. I'm not going to stop you from having that. But if it's not an omni being, and if it's not a maximal being, it's just another being at that point. It's another creature in the chain of creaturely things to me. And so I just sort of shrug my shoulders and go, okay. You enjoy.
Yeah, it's fair enough and well received. So, I don't know. I can get out of your guys' hair, Elliot.
No. So, do you have time on your hands, Josh?
Yeah. I'm going to hang out for a bit. Sure.
So, obviously, like, I don't really know how to dialogue with a process theologian, because it's so foreign to me, especially from where I come from. And like, most of my arguments have been calibrated for like more fundamentalists, Christians, or classical theists. So like, you and I have like no beef at all. And I totally appreciate the perspective you're coming from, because it solves a lot of problems that, you will have when you invent the classical theist Christian God. So I see you as an ally. If everyone was a process theologian, the world would be a lot better place. But we've got a classical theist backstage that I'm going to bring on. We've had him on several times before, and we're going to see how he answers these issues. Before I do that, I noticed we have yet another person backstage, Joseph Benjamin. I don't want you to hang out and waste your time. I see you don't have a webcam on. That is my one requirement, to have somebody come on and join us, so that we can have a more personal conversation rather than just like a phone call. So if you in fact don't have a webcam, I'm not going to bring you in. So I don't want you to just, oh, you do. Okay, perfect. I will bring you in a few minutes, Joseph. We're going to bring on Brother Andrew, because he's next in the queue.
Hello, Brother Andrew.
Now you're unmuted. How's it going, man? Welcome back.
All is well. Good to be here. I joined in right when you were talking about the movie Trading Places, so just a few minutes ago. I don't know what I missed.
So what you've missed is tonight's topic is the problem of suffering. I want to like split that off from the problem of evil, because that gets into like choosing good versus evil and morality and all that. And tonight, I really want to focus on suffering, as in the world that we live in. Obviously, from your perspective as a theist, was the rules and the environment was created by God. So my perspective is that God is 100% responsible for anything that happens in the environment that He's created. And like, I have a logical syllogism that I came up with this week, and it goes like this. Premise one is that God, from the Christian worldview, God is all powerful and He is all knowing, and He can do anything that He wants to do. Premise two, the world contains incalculable amounts of suffering. The conclusion is God desires incalculable amounts of suffering. So what is your opinion of that?
Well, obviously, I would take the position that your premise 1 and your premise 2, it requires you're making a huge leap to come to your conclusion that you're and missing quite a bit of information to make that assumption. I suppose
let's start with the first premise. Is God all powerful? He can do anything he wants, and he's all knowing, so he would obviously know the future. Do you agree with that premise?
Yes. Yes, I do.
Okay, so let's skip to the second one. The world contains incalculable amounts of suffering. Would you agree with that premise?
That one, it all depends on what you mean by suffering.
I told you.
So, for example, how I define suffering is things in the natural world that do harm, such as diseases, cancers, natural disasters, things that we don't choose, things that happen to us that hurt us and make us feel pain.
Okay, all right, that defines it better, because if you were going to say something like, I committed a crime and then went to prison and now I'm in prison suffering, is that really suffering? But that's not what you mean.
Right. I'm defining it by like the natural world, like when God cursed the earth and he allowed or created death, the idea of death, it didn't exist before that. And he cursed the ground and he essentially like rewrote the laws of physics to allow for entropy and disease and natural disasters. Like that's what I mean by suffering. It's suffering that happens to us, not suffering that we create by free will.
Right. So, but we don't have free will anyway, but maybe we can talk about that later. So I wouldn't be a classic Orthodox type Christian who believes that you do not have what's called the libertarian type free will, where you're an agent of your own actions. We don't have that.
Right. But, so that's irrelevant to the discussion tonight, the free will problem and the evil problem. Like I don't choose to get cancer or to have my house destroyed by a tornado.
Okay, understood. Right. So I guess the classical Christian explanation for that is the original sin. And then, so the world was created perfectly. It was the Garden of Eden, whether or not you believe that it was an actual place, or if that's a metaphor for just meaning perfection. The world was a perfect place. So they would say that the original sin, eating from the knowledge. So if you think about that story, the quest for knowledge is the sin. In other words, you're supposed to stay ignorant. That's the perfect state of being. But when they quested, they wanted to know more. They wanted to know things that they were not supposed to know. If you think about the story, that's what the story is saying. That's the original sin. That's Eve's sin, actually. That's Eve's sin. That's not Adam's sin.
I get that, but we're past that. We're to the point where God comes down and he decides, like he has. Do you think God has free will over how he decides to what actions to take? Could he have chosen? Could God have come down and chosen to simply put things back the way they were before? If he's all powerful, which was in part of my first premise, and he has complete control, like he didn't have to curse the earth. He didn't have to invent death. He made a choice to do that. Like we're past the original sin. That's where we're at. God's actions.
But if you're in a classroom taking a test and you're just struggling, failing, and the teacher gives you the answers, did you learn anything? Or did you just skate? You didn't learn anything. So don't you think that what you would call suffering is God's way of teaching?
But the analogy doesn't work because the teacher's not actively lighting me on fire while I'm taking the test.
Yeah, right.
No, but in the analogy, you're lighting yourself on fire.
Well, I mean, then I'm a fucking idiot. I don't know what to tell you. Like, if I'm lighting myself on fire while taking a test, and I know I'm taking a test. I'm not being. That's the other part of the problem, is that we don't know we're taking a test until somebody else who's not the teacher has to come around and tell us we're taking a test. So like, I don't quite follow. I'm sorry, I just don't quite follow the analogy. Is all I'm saying. I'm not saying it's like wrong or anything. I'm just having a hard time tracking.
I think
Okay,
it's.
and
I think it's also deeply problematic, even if we're going to go from a pastoral perspective, to suggest that all suffering is for redemptive purposes. Like, that's wild. How do you look at the face of a suffering child on the street and tell them, like, oh, God means this for your good? Like, there's no way to do that unless like the mortal gymnastics necessitated for that is wild. Like, it doesn't preach, so to speak, to use like very Christian language. Like, from a pastoral perspective, I find the suggestion that suffering is necessary and it's meant for teaching is wild and inadequate.
it's not the child's sin that brought the hunger in your example. It's
Sure.
someone else's, most likely her parents.
Okay, but
Or
Jesus said that's bullshit. When Jesus was confronted with that question, am I suffering because of my sin or my parents? He said neither. So
we're not suffering because of our sin. We're suffering because God has done something to us.
Yeah.
I don't. That's just an assertion. You'd have to argue for that. That's just an assertion.
I get that straight. I get that straight out of the text. Like, God comes down and delivers a curse. Like, God did a thing. God did a second act of creation. Like, he rewrote the laws of physics. Death didn't exist before the curse. The ground itself wasn't cursed before the curse. Like, those are God's actions that he decided upon.
Oh, so you don't. Okay, I guess we're making an assumption that you don't make a difference. You don't make a distinction between history and facts. So, do you leave room for the possibility? For instance, earlier you were talking about the Book of Job. Now, I don't think it's wise to base your worldview or church doctrine from the Book of Job. The Book of Job is supposed to be man's attempt at trying to understand why the things around him are happening. They didn't understand in the ancient world about plate tectonics and crusts of the earth moving over and under each other, so they had to explain what the earthquake was.
Right, it's a parable.
I wouldn't form your worldview on the Book of Job, first of all. So
I don't form my worldview on any part of the Bible whatsoever, Job aside. Like, I'm simply critiquing this idea from Genesis chapter 3 that God is the one who's ultimately responsible for all the suffering in the world. He created it.
And
okay,
keep in
that's
mind
it. But of course you do. You're creating your worldview on the opposite of the scriptures. So of course you're using the scriptures.
No, I'm not. I would defy you to tell me even what my worldview is. I mean, I haven't necessarily given it. It's completely separate from the Christian. We're talking about the Christian worldview. Like, mine doesn't matter for this conversation right now.
But sometimes when I hear, I'm just going to say it this way, a non-believer who claims to be atheist, they sound more like me to be agnostic. Even though they claim themselves to be atheists, the way they talk sounds agnostic to me.
What does that have to do with my logical syllogism?
Well, you can't expect that you're reading texts that you just refuse. How can you understand it when you even refuse its validity? Why would you be expected to understand it?
Well, what part of the syllogism
Doesn't make any sense.
Elliot, could you read it again? The syllogism again, because I'd like to know what part of the syllogism is opposite or refuted by the Bible because it's just wrong in its premises.
Right. So premise one is that God is all power. Now, this is from the Christian perspective. Now, I don't have to accept a perspective in order to understand it. So I'm simply reading the text at face value. And you can take issue with that. But premise one is the Christian God is all powerful and all knowing, and therefore he has all control. Everything's within his control. Like, that's premise one. Now, you said you accepted that. Premise two is that the world, as we know it, contains incalculable amounts of suffering, whether it's human suffering, animal suffering, or what have you. The conclusion is that based on the fact that God can do anything and is in control and knows everything, and the world is the way that it is, God desires incalculable amounts of suffering in the world. Now, Andrew, what part of that do you take issue with?
Let me ask you a clarifying question before we go on with that. If God was to intervene, and I don't like to use personal because then it gets personal, in somebody's life that is having some trouble, so God intervenes, and they're aware that it's God. There's no question, they're aware that it's God. It's not some sort of fluke of nature or something like that. Are you under the impression that that person would be, for the rest of their days, they would worship God, they would do do God's will? Are you under the impression that they would do such a thing?
I have no idea.
Well, it's important. It's important because
they might or they might not. It depends on the person. So if I say yes, they'll worship God for the end of their days if God intervenes, then what?
Okay, that's good. We can go down that path. But that's what we have in scriptures is just the opposite. When God reaches down and helps, the people constantly turn their back on it. So we have a cycle of that happening in the Hebrew Bible. God intervenes. They turn their back on it. It just cycles over and over again. So there's no proof that if God reached down and helped somebody in their life, that they would follow the Lord. They would just do the opposite. So why should he intervene?
I'm not talking about God intervening now. I'm talking about what God did in Genesis chapter 3. He set up the entire system to allow and maintain and the flourishing of suffering. It's got nothing to do with how God might individually intervene today or in the Bible, throughout the Old and New Testament. It has to do with what the environment that he originally created in Genesis 3. Whatever God does after that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what he does after that. He engineered the world to create incalculable amounts of suffering. Like, that's the world that we live in. Whether he chooses to intervene, tomorrow in one guy's life and that guy follows God or rejects God is irrelevant.
But you don't even believe that yourself. Why would you make this argument when you don't even believe it yourself?
But that's not relevant. That's not relevant to the syllogism.
It's not relevant. There's an old quote that says the mark of an intelligent mind is one that can entertain ideas without accepting them. I am using the source material to critique itself based on the world that I see.
Okay, but why not? That is the writer's interpretation of what happened, because the writer was not there. We know that, right? The writer.
What I know is that scores of millions of Christians today believe that that's actually what happened. That's why I'm addressing that specifically. Okay. Fundamentalist evangelical Christians believe that Genesis 3 was a literal thing that happened. That's how I'm critiquing it from their worldview. Right.
Well, I also think maybe, Andrew, you're missing the point of the conclusion here, is that it is a statement on the desire of God rather than just why is there suffering in the world. It is a statement that the reason there's suffering in the world is because God desires incalculable suffering.
Mhm.
For what, to what end? Why would he want that?
I don't know why. I mean, why does God make us suffer to begin with? I don't know. That's the theodicy. I don't subscribe to that.
Andrew, that's our question to Christians: is why would God allow that?
Right.
That's not for us to come up with.
No, why would he desire it? That's different than why did he make this system? Why would he desire that?
I don't know. That's a question for the Christians. Why would he desire it? The facts are that he does, or else it wouldn't exist.
No, at every opportunity, he gives us a chance. He gives us the opportunity to change ourselves.
Can we change the laws of physics and cure death?
But why does that bother you so much? That things happen and people die. Why does that bother you so much?
Wow. Why wouldn't it bother me? Does it bother you? It would bother anybody who has a conscience. It
doesn't bother me in the least bit. Not in
It
the
doesn't
least
bother
bit.
you that 4-year-olds get terminal cancer?
That 4-year-olds get cancer. Does that bother me?
Does that bother you? If you say no, you're going to look like a psychopath.
It really should.
No. I'm just trying to think as to the right way to answer it so that you understand.
The only right way to answer it would be that it does bother you.
No, but because you're not, there's probably a few things you're not thinking about. I mean, who is the you that you're talking about?
Brother Andrew. Does it bother Brother Andrew? That's the you I'm talking to.
Right, but who am I to be bothered by things? Am I this
opinions?
This person that you see on the camera? Is that me? To be bothered by things?
Can we?
We don't need to do a phenomenological discussion of beingness. We can read Heidegger later.
But that's the point. That is the point, though.
It's not.
If
You're stating the question. If God is all powerful and all loving and all knowing, and suffering exists in the world, God is the author of suffering by definition. That's the problem. You can't bat around that. I
mean, there's an easy way to answer this, but you don't want to. You don't want to take the answer.
Yeah, say God's not all powerful, or God's not all loving.
Andrew,
or God is everything.
There's nothing wrong with just walking right into the trap. It's not going to hurt you.
Okay. No, but why would, if I'm not, you say I should be bothered. Well, if I'm not if there's no me, why am I bothered?
Are you bothered?
You can't just wave your hand at what I'm saying because it didn't go with how you wanted me to answer the question. I mean, the fact remains that you're bothered by people getting sick and dying because you're buying into the illusion that you should be thinking about these things and be bothered by it.
The amount of contortions you're willing to do in order to dodge just answering why does God want suffering is astounding to me.
No, because I am a theist, but I'm not an orthodox. So I'm not going to answer that way because that's not my view on things.
I'm also a theist. And I'm also not orthodox, but there's a way to do it.
There's a way you do it, but that's not my way.
Okay, how do you do it?
How do you? What's your answer?
That is the answer.
To be Darth Dawkins light and play philosophical mumbo jumbo with us? Like that's the answer? I just don't understand why we ended up down this path when it's a very simple syllogism, and let's stick to our guns. That's all.
Okay, but you asked me why I'm not sitting at home wringing my hands and crying and weeping because people are dying, because there's no me to be thinking that way.
Andrew, you're being extremely hyperbolic. All I asked you was if it bothers you. I'm not needing to see you break down in tears.
It does not bother me. I just told you that it does not bother me.
So you have no drive whatsoever to donate to a research center that may be trying to research cures for childhood cancer. You don't really care about that at all.
I don't understand the question.
Do you not feel a compassionate drive to donate to St. Jude's Children's Cancer Research Center?
Do you want the world to be a better place?
Do I want the world to be a better place? It's never going to be, and it doesn't matter whether I like it or don't like it. It doesn't matter whether I like it or don't like it.
So you've absolved yourself with your philosophy. You've absolved yourself of all responsibility. You don't have to take any actions at all to try to make a little piece of the world a better place. Like, it's just, you wash your hands of it.
But now you're talking about two different things. I don't feel any sort of way about it, but that doesn't preclude me from doing something. I just don't feel any sort of way about it.
So what does this have to do with God wanting suffering and desiring it?
I'm not sure that has anything to do with it. I just don't feel any sort of way about that. You say that God is doing this or not doing that. I say, great. It doesn't. Why I can't do anything about it, even if I cared. So what? I don't understand the purpose of this.
Because it's the topic of the show tonight.
Yeah, but the topic doesn't. It seems like a complete waste of time to me.
So
okay, so why did you call in tonight then? To tell us that it's a waste of time?
I thought you were going to talk about free will.
No, that's not the topic at all. Free will is simply one of the many excuses that Christians give for why they're suffering in the world. That's all. And I'm saying that we don't use our free will to choose tornadoes and childhood cancer, so it's irrelevant. I'm talking about suffering. We can't use our free will to like rewrite the laws of physics. So free will is irrelevant.
Okay, there's tornadoes because of fronts and wind patterns. And what's the confusion? That's why it happens. There's earthquakes because the
it has to do with the Christian worldview. So under a materialistic worldview, these events are easily explained, whatever they happen to be, whether it's cancer or pathogens or tornadoes. So I'm totally on that worldview. I can explain it. But under the Christian worldview, God is responsible for all these things. That's the critique from us tonight, is that this is God's problem. This is God's doing.
Well, I'm not sure where you're getting that from. So do you think that God reached down
Theology 101 and the Bible? This is a perennial problem in philosophy.
Since I'm new to this show, can I just ask a clarifying question from you, Andrew? You said the Trinity is made up. Are you a Christian, or are you just some sort of other theist that I'm unaware of?
A Christian, yes.
Okay. I'm just trying to understand where we're approaching the conversation from. Thanks for clarifying, right? I appreciate that. Could you be a little more specific on which sect of Christianity you fall into, or do you not want to go down that path?
Typically we say that a biblical Unitarian is not a sect. The sect is just being Christian. That's the sect. Being Christian. Biblical Unitarian is not a denomination.
I did not realize that. I'm very sorry. I didn't mean to impose that on you.
No. So Andrew, where do you get your source material from? Are you pull it from the Bible, or do you get it from somewhere else?
Yeah, the source material from the scriptures. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have a literal interpretation?
No.
So when it comes to Genesis, do you think Genesis 3, the curse actually took place exactly how it's written?
Well, no. And let me give you another example. For instance, this might make it more clear. If we have in the New Testament, let me just jump to this for a moment. Take your time for a moment. We have stories of Jesus being alone, but we have the narrator telling us what he said and what he did while he was alone. For instance, take this cup from me, let it pass from me. Well, if he was alone, who was there to hear that story? Do you think Jesus went back to the others and told them what he prayed? That seems highly unlikely. So, although I believe every word of the Bible, you have to take out the parts that are used for literary effect or to fill in the gaps, for instance. When they're explaining things, they're filling in the gaps. It may not be literally word for word what happened. That's sort of literalness, but it's literally what happened, just not word for word.
So Andrew, can I ask then, is your hang up on the syllogism basically coming down to the word desire and what God desires maybe necessarily being framed in the sort of like cartoon villain pleasure from pain type of desire, or is that kind of like where the divergence was in this conversation?
He's been talking the whole time, and I don't think we've gotten anything from him. Andrew, I think your audio is shut off somehow. We can see you talking, but we can't hear you.
I know. I had a call coming in, and it mutes when the call comes in. It's terrible.
Sorry about that.
You should probably repeat it.
If I could just repeat it for you. So the conversation diverged with you, Andrew, and I think part of it is just because maybe we didn't understand the perspective everybody was coming from here. Was part of the divergence, Andrew, you think, based on the syllogism's use of the word desire? God desires suffering. Is that sort of like where maybe we had a little bit of a hang up?
No, I don't. I'm not sure about that. I don't think I have a problem with that.
Okay. Well,
so
if
it sounds like you technically agree with the syllogism, you just don't really care. Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, maybe. Yeah, I don't care, but I'd have to think about it a little bit more.
So how do you reconcile suffering in your Christian worldview? What can you make it make sense?
I don't necessarily think that way. I know that's not really helpful to this discussion, but I'm just putting my 2 cents in and saying I don't really think about things that way. Like, how do things make me feel? I don't think that way.
Okay, so then we don't necessarily disagree that it's a wrong state. It's a incorrect statement. I don't want to use moral language. I want to be a little bit more clear here. So we don't necessarily disagree with the claim. It's that we disagree whether the claim matters at all. Is that where we're at?
Well, even with Christians, I think that they make themselves the main character of the Bible. Where they're in the supporting cast, they're not the main character of the Bible. So they say things as if it matters what their opinion is. I don't like this, I don't like that. Well, that's nice to think that way, but you're not the main character of the Bible. God is the main character of the Bible.
So suffering's okay because God does it?
Come again?
I'm sorry, suffering's okay because God does it? Is that basically what it comes down to?
Well, what do you mean suffering?
I thought I defined it already.
Oh, okay, but what if you're in some natural disaster and you're under a pile of rubble? I suppose you would think that's suffering. But so if that was you, you would think you would curse God? That's what you would do?
No, because I'm not a Christian. I'm a materialist. I understand why those things happen. Like, I have to be kind of okay with it. With my explanation, I wouldn't curse anything. Maybe I'd curse the tornado, but it would be, just the reaction. It's not something that I was serious about. It's when you transfer over to the Christian worldview, you have to recognize, maybe you don't care, but you have to recognize that happens to you because of an environment that God designed. Like, God wanted that to happen, or it wouldn't have happened. He wouldn't have allowed for tornadoes. He wouldn't have rewritten the laws of physics. He wouldn't have cursed the ground. He wouldn't have invented death. Like, that's something that I would imagine the Christian would have to grapple with. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
It does. It's just not something that I think about a lot.
Okay. So, I mean, that's fair too. Like, that's a fair answer. You just don't think about it. I mean, I can't criticize you for that, but I do have to. But I have to say that it by not thinking about it, you're just basically saying God is God, so deal with it. Like, okay, that also sucks.
Why does that suck?
Because it's an unresolved answer.
I think it resolves the whole thing. I'm not God, so I don't have to worry about it. That's the whole answer.
But okay, I mean, that's up to you. That doesn't necessarily apply to the rest of us, though.
And I get that. That's probably the main reason why. There's two main reasons why people are atheist, agnostic, don't go to church. Fill in the blank. One is, why do bad things happen to, you could say, good people, and then why are church people so what's that word?
Hypocritical.
Hypocritical. Yes. Yeah. Those are really the only two that I hear. Reasons, why people are unbelievers or whatever words you want to put in.
I think you're missing a really big one, and it's because people just don't believe the stories.
Yeah, there's also research on this, like there's also like the current given trend that Christians, for whatever reason, think it's a good idea that like nationalism is great. That's one of the leading reasons people are walking away from the church today. The fact that Christians tend to stick their head in the sand when it comes to science, that's a big reason. The treatment of LGBTQ folks is a major reason people are leaving the faith. I mean, the whole problem of religious pluralism, that's a big reason. So there's tons of them as to why people are leaving. But like, I think if I can give like just, again, the pastoral aspect of this is bothering me. I have two very close friends of mine who had been struggling to get pregnant for a long time. They finally get pregnant, very excited. Pregnancy was going wonderful, no complications. At 38 weeks, they lost the child. How do I tell them, like, what is that? That within a specific Christian perspective, that's God's will and God's plan. How do I tell that to the parents in any convincing or meaningful way? Other than like, God is God, fuck your kids, sorry, that's how it happens. That's a pretty damn good reason to stop being a Christian if that's your answer. I wouldn't worship that God. That God's a moral monster. That God's not even as nice as Jesus. And if you're a Christian, God has to be at least as nice as Jesus. That's like the whole fucking point. Like Hebrews, no one has seen the Father until they have seen me. If you want to know what God looks like, has to look like Jesus. A God who allows or wills suffering is not a good or loving or beautiful God, and is a moral monster, and quite frankly made up. So I don't get it. As a Christian, I'm baffled how you're defending this, like, because theoretically we should be on the same team, and I'm at a loss for words.
I think the answer. I'm sorry.
You said two contradictory things. You said you don't like it and it's made up. So which is it?
Both.
It can't be both.
Why not? okay, George Washington was a gay black midget. I don't like that, and I just made it up. Like, what do you want me to say, dude?
That doesn't make any sense.
It does. I made something up, and I don't like it.
Well, Andrew, have you ever watched a movie which clearly is fiction and you just didn't like it? The story sucked. The villain was terrible. I mean, it wasn't convincing. I mean, doesn't that make sense? That fictional stories aren't necessarily likable ones?
No, but you put the equal emphasis on that it's made up. When I'm watching a fictional story, there's no question to me as to whether it's made up or not. You made equal importance on the fact that it's made up, as if there's no alternative view of a fictional movie that some people buy that it's real. That doesn't exist. Everybody knows it's made up.
All right, if we bail on the idea that it's made up, and I grant that the God of classical theism is real, 100%, my answer does not change. That God is a moral monster, is not worthy of worship, and I would rather burn in hell than bow down to that God. Not in spite of my Christian faith, but because of it, because I think that is what is demanded of me by the person of Jesus. Because that God sucks. A God who wills suffering, could prevent it and chooses not to, or is the author of it, is not a God of love and is not worthy of worship or anything at all. There's no answer to it. Like,
okay. You said there's no answer to it. So, do you want an answer or do you not? There's no answer. Which is it? Do you want an answer or there is no answer?
There. I think there's an answer. I think you bail on the idea that God is all powerful and you lean into the love bit. That's how I would go about doing it.
Well, that's your explanation. That's not my explanation. But you sound as though you're already resolved to the fact that it's all made up anyway. So,
I'm a theist. I'm a Christian. I'm an ordained minister within the Christian tradition. I'm credentialed. I have a degree. I'm a Christian. I'm a theist.
Andrew, I guess I would just ask you this. Is there any line that God can't cross where you would stop worshiping him? Like, is there any amount of evil that God could do where you'd say, okay, that's too far. I can no longer worship this God?
No, we didn't come to that point yet. No.
Okay. Well, we have another guy backstage who wants to come on and give his perspective, and I think we've just about played yours out. So I guess we're going to leave it at that for this week.
Andrew, it was a fascinating call, Andrew. Thank you.
Can you kick me down? Maybe there's something else later on that I can get in on.
Well, we've already gone almost 2 hours tonight, so we're kind of running out of time, and I want to get the last caller in before we go. So,
all right, no problem.
You're always welcome. You can join us next week.
Yeah, let's talk about free will sometime. All right.
Okay. No problem. All right, man. You take care.
Drive safe.
All right.
I should probably also hop off too, friends.
Well, I don't know. Maybe the next caller will blow your mind or something.
Maybe they will. All right. I can do like maybe 10 minutes.
Okay. Well, that's about all we've got, really.
Okay.
And he's gone. Well, I guess
bummer.
He did not want to hang around.
I'm sorry.
That's too bad.
I did in the chat too, Theo Reticuli. However you say your name. I've read the Old Testament many, many times.
Joseph, if you left by accident, or maybe I kicked you by accident, which I didn't mean to do, I was trying to remove Andrew. You can call us back real fast.
Yeah, if we'll give it we'll vamp for a few minutes. We'll chat for a bit. And boy, Andrew is an interesting character, isn't he? He's got some interesting takes. I was a little confused on where he wanted to go with that, though. I think he just really wanted to have a conversation about free will, not so much about what the character of God actually is, and so he kind of kept trying to direct it towards the topic of free will. I think that was the one he was really hoping to have. Maybe one day we'll have a conversation about that, but not today.
Yeah, we've had him on, I think, 3 other times, and he's definitely not a traditional Christian in the way that I guess most average Christians might be. So we've had some weird conversations with him, but yeah.
I mean, you have to at least pry it out of me that I'm not Trinitarian.
Yeah. Were you ever Trinitarian?
Oh yeah, very much so. I just think with the whole process bit, I think I could argue maybe like God became Trinitarian, but that I can see that that's not like an orthodox perspective. Like I'm not concerned about that, but
you can make the argument with process theology that God became Trinitarian by an act of creation. You can certainly make the argument, especially if you hold to life being a bunch of systems and such evolved systems, that God intentionally created Jesus, and then you can totally hold to that as a process theologian. I just find it to be much.
Yeah, it gets weird. It gets weird.
All theology.
It looks like Joseph is back now, so I'm going to go ahead and bring him on.
Awesome.
Joseph, welcome to the show. How are you tonight?
Hey, how's it going?
Hi, Joseph.
How's it going, everybody?
So you obviously have been watching for a while here, so you know what the topic is. Did you catch my logical syllogism that I gave a few times?
Yeah, towards the end when the last gentleman asked you your 3 points. And essentially it was God desiring incalculable amounts of suffering. Right?
Yeah, so premise one, real fast. Premise one is that within the Christian worldview, obviously, God is all-powerful and is all-knowing and has complete control. Premise two is that the world contains incalculable amounts of suffering, and the conclusion that would logically follow from that is that God would have to desire the world to be the way that it is with incalculable suffering. So do you agree or disagree with that syllogism?
My perspective is that it's not that he desires suffering, but that he desires us to have the choice to choose either love for one another or suffering. Of course, so you can't give someone the choice to love without giving them also the choice to suffer.
So suffering is a choice then.
And it can be, even unbeknownst to us, we can choose certain things. We can allow certain things to happen. For example, some might not like this, but I've known women who have chosen to stay in particular relationships. They know was abusive. They're very aware of the abusive relationship, but for whatever reason they choose to stay. Now, some would say, well, it's because of the threat of physical harm, but it may not even be physical harm. It could just be emotional abuse. So they can choose to, but they choose to stay and allow that level of suffering upon themselves. So whatever clicks in their brain, where they decide to leave and decide, I am greater than this, and I'm going to choose different. So they choose a different relationship, a different path, and then they eventually leave.
So then, Joseph, I have to ask you, why focus on the individual choice? Because the desire for maximal or ultimate or incalculable suffering, I guess in this case, is not an individual critique on a free will basis. It is a critique of the overall system that God has created. And so the critique is that while individually we can have the choice, the system itself is set up in a way that demands suffering be an outcome. Not a choice, but it is a demanded, necessary, required outcome of the system that has been set up. So, despite having the choice to walk away from some suffering, and we can nitpick that in a bit, the system itself results in necessarily incalculable suffering. How would your answer even begin to address that?
Well, I think of it kind of like the example I gave was like an example of a raindrop. Oh, it's sprinkling outside. But if you have many raindrops, or if you will, many acts of suffering, many people choosing, or in some cases not choosing, it's happening to them for one reason or another. A child is being abused. That's not something they choose, obviously. But a parent can choose to abuse a child. That's something they do choose. So there's sort of like this tango that we all have, because we are all individuals, but all connected at the same time. Just like you can't have a thunderstorm without lots of little raindrops or little bits of suffering. Um, that's just the
I
way
mean,
it is. We're all just interconnected in that way. And the universe shows that in the stars and how they connected, how the planets are miraculously correct connected. They're not they're independent, but they also are synergistically holistic as well in a very fascinating way. So we
what's
can't
so
operate in the vacuum, but we also um, so what I do can affect you. What I say can affect you, but it can also affect me individually. So it's that ripple effect. It's that butterfly effect that Ashton Kutcher movie that I really, really like. That I think
what
explains it the best way possible.
Joseph? What is holistic about the competition for resources? Because ultimately, what suffering comes down to, in a human sense, is we are competing for resources. What is holistic or divine about the necessity of that?
There's nothing divine about it. In fact, when if you are to believe the story in the Bible about how God manna from heaven to feed the people when they were begging for food, pigeons and bread and stuff like that, whatever manna is, um, it was, or even Jesus multiplying the fish. You get people starving on the hill, listening to a sermon, they're hungry. At a certain point, you want to eat. So why fight each other over food? Here's the food. Or him going out into the sea, you got a bunch of fishermen, you can imagine, fighting over whatever scraps they feel like is left. Okay, there's a lot of competition there. That's the human element. But God's will is that everyone benefits, everyone collaborates to get whatever fish that is available so they can share among themselves. I'm speaking about the human nature. Because I can point to many examples of where it's God's nature for us to have an abundance of a thing, but it's because of our choice that we choose to have a lack of a thing, which includes resources.
Then why did then why did Jesus stop doing it? Why did he stop splitting the fish? Why did God stop feeding us manna? Why did he choose to let us compete for limited resources?
So the way I feel about it is that, and I think the last gentleman kind of pointed to it, is that, would you, yeah, sure, you can give a child a test and give him all the answers to it, and he'll pass it with flying colors. He won't learn anything from it. So the whole purpose of giving Christ being the exemplifying what it means to have an abundance and to share and to be generous amongst ourselves is so he can demonstrate it, not so he can continuously perform these acts of generosity for us, but we're supposed to see it as an example and do it among. The point was for us to imitate what is done, to to um to do unto others as you want others to be done to you. So
So then, Joseph, here's the problem, and here's why it's systemic. If I am generous, if I perfectly take care of myself, my family, my loved ones, and all of the excess that I have, and I know 100% that I have excess that I can give away to people who have lesser than me, my resources are going to be depleted because people are going to know that I have resources to hand out. I am therefore going to suffer either by having my resources stolen by people who don't have those abundant resources, or I am going to suffer internally with the moral plight of knowing I don't have enough resources to help the others out. So I'm now trapped in a systemic cycle of suffering here, Joseph, and it's something that God created.
well, I mean, you take the position that God has created this. I take the position that we choose it. You're saying that there's no way out, and I'm saying that it was demonstrated that there absolutely is. But we, for whatever reason, you can call it sin, you can call it arrogance, pride, whatever, um, greed, we choose. So there's always going to be, you're right, that sort of push and pull thing. I want to provide for my family. I want to make sure I have enough resources. But if I give too much, then I'm depriving myself. I feel like we constantly struggle with that.
No,
human beings.
it's not about depriving myself, Joseph. Hang on, it's not about depriving myself. In my scenario, I have a perfect amount of food for myself, my family, whatever. And then I also have excess that I know I can give away, and so I can give it out to people. Either people are going to learn about that and take advantage of me, or I'm not going to have enough for everybody else because I'm not Jesus and I can't split fish magically. And so I am going to feel moral suffering over not being able to help the less fortunate. I'm trapped in a system of suffering, thus the conclusion of Eliot's premises, God desires incalculable suffering.
Yeah, Joseph, do you believe God is all powerful?
All powerful, all knowing, omniscient, all of that.
Okay.
All of the above.
Okay, cool. So before creation, if God is all powerful, so God creates ex nihilo, which is, standard Christian teaching. God created out of nothing, and God is all knowing. That means that there was a time prior to creation that God didn't actually sit down, right? I'm using metaphor, but God sits down and was like, I'm going to make the world now, or the universe or whatever. It didn't exist. God knew that if this world he creates, if I created that, the Holocaust would happen, genocide would happen, childhood cancer would happen if I create this world. And God chose to do it anyway, because God is all powerful and all knowing. That means God desires suffering, or God is the author of suffering. I don't see a way out of that. I think that's the larger picture that Eliot's syllogism is kind of pointing us at, that makes me uncomfortable and keeps me up at night. Because Joseph, you and I are more on the same team than not. I'm a Christian, I'm a theist, but this is the problem for me. You see what I'm saying?
Okay. So the desire, I feel, is not the suffering. And of course, if he's all knowing, of course you would say, well, he knew we was going to be in the condition we are in, data centers and the global warming, all this shit going on. So why would he allow this to happen? And even knowing it, which is the beauty of the choice that he gave us. He made a choice to give us a choice. To choose either to destroy our environment, to hurt one another, to kill one another, or to do the opposite, or to feed one another, or to do the opposite. And that's the whole test, in a sense, for ourselves.
So you take this. So Joseph, you take the stance that suffering is a tool.
I wouldn't say it's a tool. I would say because we choose things, it doesn't have to be a tool. It's kind of like someone who grabs a hammer when they should be grabbing a screwdriver. You can choose to grab a hammer when you should use a screwdriver. But we choose to grab the hammer when we should use a screwdriver.
Let me get in on this real fast. Joseph, I like to split the two different kinds of suffering apart. One is the suffering that we inflict upon each other, like social issues that we could, in fact, choose. But there's a second aspect to suffering that has nothing to do with choice whatsoever, and that's the suffering that happens to us through the natural world. So I can't choose tornadoes, and I can't choose cancer. It has nothing to do with our actions. Those things are things that God has chosen. God has chosen tornadoes. He's chosen natural disasters. He's chosen cancer and viruses. He created those. He is fully in control of those. That has nothing to do with my choice. So I could take, I don't, but I could take responsibility for all of the evil, the immorality, and the violence in the world. Yes, but I can't take responsibility for tornadoes, hurricanes, lightning strikes, cancer, and diseases. So my question is, how does a Christian reconcile that kind of suffering with their worldview?
Well, in terms of the suffering that happens to our environment that is seemingly outside of our control, I can point to many examples in which, and I mentioned the data centers as one, the pollution in our air that's causing global warming. It's like 100 degrees here when I can't remember the last time it's been 100 degrees in Michigan. and all that I've been living on this earth so far. So we influence a lot of the natural disasters that you say is um, solely caused by God. But then there's also, for example, let's say volcanoes or a mudslide or an avalanche. These are things that may or may not involve our intervention, but it could just be a natural cause of things. A natural cause of things doesn't make it suffering. If, let's say, a tornado, we see it as death and destruction. That tornado is just a, whatever cause and effect of things that happen in the environment naturally that would have taken place regardless if we were on Earth or not. We just have to kind of get around it, respect nature. Even if you go into the woods, people foolishly go into the woods and think that a bear is not going to attack us. Well, you can say, well, God is allowing me to suffer because a bear attacked me. But you chose to go in the woods. You chose to go in a place and not be prepared and not have a healthy level of boundaries and respect for that animal, that bear or that moose that could potentially kill you. And likewise, we as human beings tend to lack boundaries when it comes to nature, when it comes to tornadoes, hurricanes. We want to build, for example, in Florida, it's a swampy area, but then people complain about it leveling and sinking. Well, it was always going to do that. But you choose to build an entire city on a swampy area in a hurricane-prone city. You choose to. So it's a lack of boundaries. It's not, you see it and say, well, this is happening, but we're living there. But it's like almost sort of blaming the animals for when we encroach upon their environment. But we're not giving the animals their healthy amount of space to operate freely while we can operate freely because we feel like we can do anything. We feel like we are God in a lot of sense. We are the masters of the universe. And then we pay the consequences for it. And then we blame God for what has always been before we even came on earth. That's just my opinion.
But in Genesis chapter 3, it says that God cursed the earth itself. Like he did this to us. He did this to the earth. This, at one point, after he finished creating, he looked on his creation. He says that it's good, that it's perfect. And then later on, it comes time for the curse, and he destroys it. He creates the environment where natural disasters happen. He created cancer. He created disease. Cancer wouldn't exist if God hadn't engineered it. We didn't. Now we can say, well, we might have risk factors, or we might, pollute the earth with chemicals that could cause cancer, but cancer itself was created by God. That's my problem.
So interesting. Well, if you're going to use cancer, let's do diabetes. I know plenty of people in my family who has it. And they would tell you, and these are some of the most God-fearing people that I know, they will reflect on their eating habits when they were a kid. This is how I got type 2. This is how I got it. Yeah, it sucked. I was angry at God. But ultimately, I'm the one that gave that to myself. Now, when it comes to type 1, oh, well, what about the kid who didn't, eat all that junk food or whatever produce or products that we consume today that causes diabetes? They were born that way. Well, now you're looking at the parents' responsibility in some aspect. But what if it wasn't the parents? You can go back to the generations back to how people's genes and people's past eating habits catches up to the future. This is just the product of sin. Like I said, we are all like droplets, and if someone makes a ripple effect, whether for better or for worse, it's going to affect future generations. If you have poverty from your great grandparents, you're probably going to have poverty in this generation, unless you break that whatever curse or that mindset that came with that, and then you became something more. You overcame that. I choose not to.
Joseph, what could you possibly do to overcome uncontrolled cellular division?
Say that one more time.
What could you possibly do to overcome, by free choice, uncontrolled cellular division?
What could I possibly do? Well,
what could I possibly do? What could my kids well, I'm never going to have kids, but what could someone's kids possibly do to stop themselves from having uncontrolled cellular division? Not stop themselves from becoming insulin resistant. Stop their genetics from having uncontrolled cellular division.
Well, there's many things they can do. Dietary wise, it could be environment can change. Some people it can be as simple as having love in their life, but that doesn't guarantee that person is going to recover fully and survive whatever that degenerative disease is causing. There's no guarantee.
You think love is going to stop someone from getting bone cancer, Joseph?
No, absolutely. But I believe love is better to give someone. I would much rather someone have love before they go. If
How
their
does that?
last moment is love, then it is to be death and destruction and despair. So hope is love can lead to hope for that individual for when they do pass over. If they do see the other side, okay, well, yeah, this stuff, but this is maybe it's not so bad after. So if they're left with that, to me, I think that's better than, well, screw it. This is just.
I'm sorry, Elliot. I just can't get him back on track. I tried.
Well,
I'm sorry,
Joseph. I would just ask you this: who created death?
Well, according to Scripture, if you are to go by that, Adam and Eve, who chose to go against God's will. And
So you're saying Adam and Eve themselves created death?
Yeah. I mean,
sans God, they created death?
On the most basic level.
On the most primary level, Adam and Eve created death sans a deity. If God didn't exist, Adam and Eve could have created death.
Well, there's always a choice. You can choose to follow my laws and obey my orders and not go this direction, or you can and cause this upon yourself. So what you're trying to, well, not trying to say, what you are saying is that it's because, well, let me ask you this. Would we just all be better off if none of us existed? If humans didn't exist on Earth, and because it doesn't, and God is God, then you don't exist, then you don't have to work, then you don't have the dilemma of choice, or is God is he the one that's making this happen? Am I the one making this happen?
Joseph, that's so I don't mean to be rude here, but that's a nonsense question. I can't answer that. The answer is null, because if I don't exist, then there is no better or worse. There is nothing. There is null. There is void. I can't answer that question. It can't possibly be better because there's nothing there, but it can't be worse either because again, there's nothing there. That's a non-referential answer. I can't give you one.
So, Joseph, I got my Bible open here to Genesis chapter 4, and I'm down here in verse 17, and I'll just read the whole passage for you, and you can tell me if this is something Adam and Eve did to themselves or if this is something that God did to them. And it says, "And unto Adam he said, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree of which I commanded thee, saying, thou shalt not eat of it, cursed is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow thou shalt eat of it all the days of thy life. Thorns and also thistles shall it bring forth to thee, and thou shalt eat of the herb of the field. In the sweat of thy face thou shalt eat bread, till thou return unto the ground. For of it wast thou taken, for dust thou art, and unto dust thou shalt return." Is that an action that God is doing, or is that an action that Adam and Eve are doing? Because Adam and Eve couldn't curse themselves. They couldn't rewrite the laws of physics and create death. God had to come down, and he had to do that. When they ate of the fruit of the forbidden tree, it didn't automatically result in the earth changing. God had to then take an action. He had to come down. He had to curse them. He had to curse the earth. He had to invent death. Like, he's ultimately responsible. You can say Adam and Eve did the sin, but God did the curse. Does that make sense?
So you're talking about the cause and effect. Adam and Eve, they were the cause. I was like, okay, well, this is the consequence. It makes sense. I would say it's no different than how you would look at your own father. There's certain rules that he had in the household when you were of a certain age. If you go outside the bounds of those rules, well, now there's a consequence to it. You kick out of the house, maybe you go sit in the corner if you're a little kid, whatever. There's consequences to action. So what you're presupposing is that God should be a God of no consequences, that we should just do whatever we want to do and that nothing has any meaning at all whatsoever. So if you
Not
go and throw your
necessarily.
finger, beat on this person, then if God, intervenes and strikes this person and curses this person, how dare God do that because of X, Y, Z? Well, God is supposed to just take a back seat and do
Well,
nothing.
I'm not saying there shouldn't be consequences at all. What I'm saying is that God had choices, and Adam and Eve did not create the consequence. God created the consequence. God had a choice to do anything to fix this, and he specifically chose to curse the earth and create death and suffering. He didn't have to do that. I mean, God has free will. He's got control over his own actions. He could have chosen 100 other consequences, or he could have just snapped his fingers and fixed it and put it all back exactly where it was before. He specifically chose to create suffering.
Like a reset or like an etch a sketch, just shake it up and then
He's got the
okay, try
power.
again.
He's got the power. He could have.
Then that would defeat the whole. And I know you guys don't like, oh, forget about free will and choice, but then it's like, then what's the point? I personally wouldn't even want to be alive if I. This might sound crazy. If I didn't, I want to feel if I stub my toe because, or if I put my hand on the stove because I know not to put it on there next time. So sometimes consequences can be a deterrent from doing that thing again that I chose to do. If I put my hand on the stove and I go ouch, then okay, I don't want to do that again. It's going to burn my skin. But in the same way, you delete someone off the earth, there's a consequence to it.
So Joseph, your example kind of fails in the face of how we act as human beings, because if I take your example very literally, which I'm going to right now for the sake of this, if I help people, if I help the homeless, if I feed the homeless at a homeless shelter or a food line, and I continually do that, and I continually see more homeless people begging for food and begging for money, and then I get hurt by that because I feel bad for those homeless people, and I constantly feel bad every single time I do it, I'm going to stop doing it, and I'm going to stop doing the good thing, Joseph. So that example doesn't work.
You will. But so I'm guessing you're speaking for yourself. I know people who would endure what you're talking about. Maybe they got cussed at
You know
by a
people that'll
homeless
endure
person.
touching the stove over and over again just because it felt bad to them.
Well, maybe not to that. Maybe
Well,
not to that extent.
let's take your hot stove analogy. So, a more consistent analogy with the scriptures and with the world that we see as it is today, it would be more realistic to say somebody goes and touches a hot stove, and instead of getting burned, their parent comes over and shoots them in the head. That's God. God is not teaching a lesson with a hot stove. God is fucking destroying his children. He's giving them cancer at 4 years old. He's sending hurricanes to kill thousands. Like, he's not teaching a lesson. He's not just letting them burn their hand a little bit. He is utterly crushing them into dirt. It's totally out of proportion.
So you feel like that the punishment doesn't match the crime.
Not even close.
Not even close. Well,
I mean, Adam and Eve ate a fruit they weren't supposed to eat, and God's overreaction was to curse the ground itself and send everyone to the grave. And then he didn't stop there. There's no damage control on God's part. God then, after the curse, allowed billions more people to be born into this world of suffering. He could have limited that damage to Adam and Eve. But instead, he's like, oh, now, because he didn't do it before, now I'm going to produce billions more humans. It's like, why not just limit this curse to just the two people that did it? That's why it's more like a parent killing their child for touching the hot stove.
okay. Well, so instead of touching a hot stone, little Johnny, how about you just don't exist? And then that's the end of it. Just
Why is it, Joseph? I have to ask you this question, and because I get this from Christians a lot, and I'm hoping maybe you can clarify this for me. Why is it that the option is always either God or complete and utter naive nihilism? Why is that always the two options? I don't quite track that.
Like, why isn't there a middle ground?
Yeah, why isn't there, like, something that's a little bit more sane between pure existence with God as the creator and the answer to everything, and nothing at all ever, the philosophical void? Why is it that? And I'm not just saying just you, but in Christians in general seem to hinge on this strange dichotomy that I don't quite understand.
I believe that there is a middle ground. Most people tend to gravitate towards extremes. I do the best I can not to. I know atheists who would say they have a middle ground, but from their perspective, they don't have an extreme. They feel like they're the more middle ground, and vice versa with devout Christians or whatever belief people have about God. Um, it's like a tightrope. I mean, I wish I could give you that answer, and that every day I'm still walking it along with the rest of you, which is why I'm here. To hear different perspectives, different thoughts, to be challenged intentionally on purpose by people who think and feel differently than I do. Which again goes back to my metaphor with the raindrops analogy. I think a lot of us kind of isolate ourselves, whether it be my atheist community, my Christian community, my Muslim, whatever community they have, but they don't integrate the way that God intended for us to do. Now, he can make us do it, but then it wouldn't be out of love. It would be by coercion. I certainly wouldn't want my child to love me by force, by me controlling his mind like a puppet. As much as it would pain me that he would go against me, I would want him to freely go against me, because that to me is the greatest act of love, is to allow this person or this child of yours that you created to decide if they love you or not.
But isn't God's love already by coercion?
In what way?
Say that again.
And how so?
So you either love God or you're getting thrown in the lake of fire. There's no alternative. So you're either living a godly life or you're out, dude. Like that's coercion. That's not free will.
It's kind of like, if you had a child, hypothetically, and the child was very rambunctious, they're running around the house, they're 18 years old. Okay, you could say, well, I'll let you stay if they keep tearing up the house. But you say, well, you can leave because I don't want you to keep destroying my house. That child would then come back and say, well, you don't really love me. I say, well, you want me to just, that doesn't make any sense. If you love me, you would respect the rules of my house. So likewise, let's just say hypothetically, we all go to the other side and we meet God at the pearly gates. And you decide, well, I don't want anything to do with you, God. Then what is God to do? I mean, you don't want nothing to do with me. It's not that I don't want nothing to do with you. Most parents would take in their own children if they were murderers because they love them that much. So, and that's the way I would think that God is.
Most parents would take their own children back to seeing them suffer in conscious eternal torment rather than throwing them into a lake of fire for conscious eternal torment for not believing they existed.
I personally don't believe in that extreme, even though I know that it's all throughout scripture. Dante's Inferno, there's a lot of things that from my own, I've had questions about that too. So I can tell you that much, and it disturbed me so much to the point where I can understand why a lot of people would throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, to hell with God and the Bible. I'm going to suffer for eternity because I don't believe in you here and now. Like, you're not helping me. So I would feel the exact same way you did, and I did. So I had to put the Bible aside and say, well, man still after all created the Bible and they wrote the words of the Bible. It's inspired by God. But I'm not naive enough to think that it is written as if God wrote the words himself because of my relationship with God. And that's the only reason why I can separate the two. Because if left to just the Bible as my only source of the nature and character and essence of God, I would be absolutely livid, into which I was. So he, in my own personal revelation, in my own personal experiences, and it's pretty much like, hey, that's not how I am. People get redeemed all the time, not just here on earth, even in afterlife. I'm like, what? Okay, that's not what it says in the Bible. So there's a lot of contradictions going on here. But if you go based on just scripture alone, you will be misled about who God is.
So, Joseph, let's go back to the idea of a middle ground again. I have a proposal for you. See if you find this to be a good middle ground that would be preferable to what we actually have. So, what I see in the world is I see evil and I see suffering and I see natural suffering as well. So we got the two. So let's go back to the garden, and God comes down. He's going to make a choice. He's going to judge his creation for disobeying him. So there is a middle ground. What he chose to do was an extreme. What if he had instead said, now you have the knowledge of good and evil because you ate of the tree. And now I'm going to give you free will to choose good or evil in the world. You can create an evil world with a lot of suffering, or you can create a good world, but it's up to you to choose. And then he stopped there and he allowed humans to be fully responsible for the suffering. And he did not create viruses and cancers and natural disasters, things that would happen to both good and bad people, because we see people choosing good and we still see bad things happening to them and they're still suffering even though they chose good. But in this middle ground scenario, if you choose good, you don't suffer. If you choose evil, you suffer. God, that's a good middle ground. I think it eliminates all randomness and all unnecessary suffering. 4-year-olds won't get cancer because they haven't chosen evil. The tornado won't come and wipe out a church. He leaves it completely up to the humans to choose good or evil. Wouldn't that have been a better system than the one we have now?
Is that well, if that would be us, that would be like saying, well, isn't it better just have one raindrop instead of a bunch of raindrops? Because we can just be one raindrop and everyone, whatever sin they do, then it only affects them and no one else around them. There is no cause and effect. So that law is pretty much out the window.
Well, no, hang on, Joseph. How did you get to there is no cause? How did you get to throwing causality out with the bathwater from God just saying, okay, you now know good and evil, so go choose and come back to me when you're done choosing? How does that get rid of causality?
How could I experience good if I'm not doing something good for someone? Like you mentioned the example of giving something to feeding the homeless. For me to know that it's good, it's something I have to do to someone. That's a good thing. But for me to also understand evil, I have to do something to someone.
No. For you to understand evil, you have to either witness evil being performed on someone else or have it done to you. You yourself don't need to perform evil to experience evil.
But that's the point. It takes someone else to. So even regardless if I'm the one committing the evil act for someone or is being committed to me, in order for me to even know what evil is, whether be it that I'm the one doing it or is being done to me, it has to be someone else involved. But
that doesn't.
In my middle ground, that's totally what's happening, though. Yes, all I'm doing is I'm eliminating natural disasters and cancer. That's all I'm doing. I'm taking that out of the equation. Now, if you want to choose to do evil and have bad and like person-on-person violence and create a terrible society, that's a choice. Like all I'm doing is I'm removing the natural world's random suffering out of the equation. I'm leaving it completely up to the humans. They can choose evil or good. They can do evil or good to each other. It's all on them.
I see. So you want it to be, so the environment, imagine an environment that's pristine, perfect, it's beautiful. But in the midst of it, you have all this evil and suffering going on that we do to amongst each other. So you want the environment to be completely unaffected by our actions.
I want the environment to be, I guess we could screw up the environment too. That's fine. But all I want is for the environment to be neutral. Like a 4-year-old is not going to get cancer, but someone can still murder somebody. It's a choice all the time. It's not a random tornado came and took my house. Like we're gonna take that out of it. It's always a direct consequence of the humans. But the world we live in now, these things happen to everyone. These uncontrollable, terrible things happen to everyone, whether they've chosen good or chosen evil. And humans' choices are completely not a part of it. Like, nobody's choosing hurricanes. Nobody's choosing cancer. Like, all I'm saying is let's a proper middle ground of God's judgment would be for God to leave it all up to human free will.
I mean, if God created the earth and the earth is what it is, with all of the natural disasters that we call disasters because we're affected by it, these are things that just happen to the earth. And I personally don't blame God for that.
They're things God created.
He created, but you talk about all the tornadoes and earthquakes, but when I go out to places like Brazil, now I see beauty in a lot of different places, the ocean. But the thing is, if I choose to go in the ocean without knowing how to swim, would I not be crazy for saying, well, God curse you because I'm here in the middle of the ocean. I should not be drowning because you created this ocean. But yet I consciously went out into the ocean.
Well, that's your choice. That's your choice. But
exactly.
No,
that's it.
I'm talking about things that happen that God specifically created, like cancer to 4-year-olds. Like, that's not somebody falling in the ocean not knowing how to swim. Why do we have that? Why did God do that? Why can a 4-year-old get terminal cancer? That is not up to humans' free will. That's not choosing evil.
It's like asking why do children become what a not abortion? It's the other word. Miscarriages. Like, well, how does that happen? How come you just can't have a child just be perfectly born without miscarriages, or if they are born, they don't have autism or any sort of defect mentally, physically?
Yeah, that would be a better world.
I agree. Unfortunately, because and there's a lot of different factors that we play a bigger role than we are aware of. It could be even emotional things with those parents. I've seen parents being able to conceive and have a healthy child once they dealt with some emotional things they dealt with. They might not have any physical ailments themselves that would cause a miscarriage. Once they kind of settled themselves emotionally about whatever they had going on in their life, now all of a sudden they have a healthy child. So it's almost as if the child would not even want to be born in that condition, in that environment that those parents are in. So,
Joseph, hold on. How does any of that relate to disqualifying Eliot's middle ground proposition about God's choice of not going scorched earth on humanity because they ate some fruit?
What is it?
How does your protest isn't the right word, but I'm going to use it anyway because I'm tired and I can't think. But how does what you say have in any way a defeater or a refutation of the proposed middle ground that Eliot was providing? Because his proposed middle ground was, hey, God, instead of being this all-powerful wizard man that went scorched earth on humanity and the earth literally, maybe you could have had a middle ground where you stepped away and said, you know what? You know about good and evil now? I'm out. You guys figure it out. Come back to me when you have the answers. How does your proposition refute or defeat Eliot's middle ground alternative to the God hypothesis?
That's interesting that you say, because I actually agree with that middle ground. I personally see it that being the case. Both of you see it as not being the case. So when you say, well, that's the choice, that's free will. But then you point out one scripture in Genesis 17 and saying, well, this is God saying that he's cursing the earth and therefore he is the absolute cause of everything. But so your middle ground is actually reasonable and it's logical. It makes sense. The issue is that you don't, how do I say this? You don't want that. I don't think you really, I don't think you want that accountability.
I mean, I'm a strong atheist. I hold the position God does not exist. I'm not a lack theist. So Joseph, I don't. The middle ground is really just Eliot trying to have a conversation with you. Myself, I don't believe any of it. I think this is all natural processes and systems unfolding. So to me, it makes sense why the world is the way it is. So what I want, what I don't want, has no bearing or any relation to the story of the Bible or of the Christian concept of a God.
You just want fairness, want balance, and rationality. And I would argue that so does God. It's just that, unfortunately, we are unfair, unbalanced, and irrational. So when you mix those and include our emotions, we then project a lot of things onto God. That is absolutely not true. But because it's easier to find a scapegoat in something, or even if you don't believe in it, there's still a level of or, it's not me, it's you. This is what's happening. Why is this happening? Right? So that's what we do. We finger point, whether it be upwards to the sky or side to side to our neighbors. You did this. You did this. No, I did. No one wants to take responsibility for their own
Well,
actions.
responsibility leads to legal consequences.
It does. It does. And it could also lead to spiritual consequences.
I don't believe in spirit, so I don't care.
Well, it's kind of like, well, hey, I could say I don't believe in gravity. I'll jump off a building because I can't see it. I will certainly feel it.
I can demonstrate gravity. I can't demonstrate mind-body duality.
Oh, okay. Right. I would say you can demonstrate God. It's the very fact of the nature of this conversation. I would say that I never quite understood why atheists would do something like you don't believe in God. Yet, for example, Richard Dawkins, he spends his entire career talking about not a God not existing, which is way more than most pastors I know who go maybe 20 years. Richard Dawkins, 50 plus years. So I'm like, that's weird. You don't believe in God.
The reason that we
or you have enmity. You have an enmity or angst towards a God. If you like, I think that's probably much more close to what it is. If I don't believe in God, I'm not talking extensively about it or having conversations with people who are believers about it. I'm not, because I don't. What's there to talk about if I don't believe in God?
I'm trying. I have a specific goal in mind, Joseph. But let me give you a counterexample. I don't believe Rogue from the X-Men exists, but I write fan fiction about her. So now what? I discuss the X-Men world. I enjoy the fiction quite a bit, and so I discuss it. I mean, I have no real qualms with that. I don't find it to be hypocritical or weird or anything. It's a nice, fun narrative story, and so I follow it. When it comes to Christianity, my story is that I was on track to go to Catholic seminary, to go to Mundelein, which is basically the equivalent of training in Rome in the United States. And with an eye towards, with my computer science knowledge, going towards working towards Pope John Paul II's vision for a digital Catholic Church, and potentially because of my sponsor, who's had connections in the Vatican, possibly working inside the Vatican myself one day. Is a far shot dream, but it wasn't impossible. So that's where my fascination with Christianity comes from. I was steeped in it. I was trained into mystic metaphysics. I was nose deep in it, and so for a large part of my growing life, my mature adulthood life, I was steeped in Catholicism. I was steeped in Christianity, and so yes, it's very natural. I have a fascination with this stuff, but it's also natural that other atheists have fascination with stuff. My current fascination with it is, I'll be perfectly straight up with you, I'm hoping to launch this into a career outside of software engineering, into something like where I can do podcasting or live streams or video content creation. I'm hoping to one day be able to do that. And I feel like this is an excellent place to that's an underserved market. And so I can be part of it. I can volunteer. I can make connections and friends and work my way towards something like that. So I have, I think, what are completely valid reasons for being part of this conversation outside of a belief or having enmity or any sort of anti-theist or counter-apologetic goals. So I don't see why that matters to the conversation.
Well, don't see why it matters to me. It's, you say you don't believe in a God, but it's the things that happen, I guess, underneath the surface that would. I'm sorry, I get what you're saying in terms of the reasons why you want to take this further as an atheist, career-wise and so forth, like the debating and things like that, growing your channel. I would look at the inspiration behind it. Even though it flies in the face of, oh well, I don't believe in God just because I'm talking about how I don't believe in God, and I honestly believe that God wants that discourse, in a sense that He doesn't need all of us to have this I believe in God dogmatically. He wants the people like yourself to be like that, but because that's something that's still in you to want to have that discourse at all. That desire to want to do it for whatever, it's not, you can say it's just money, but that's a lot of effort to go into something that's just a career, that's just money. Like a doctor says, well, I got into it to make money. Oh, I'm pretty sure you got into it also to help people and save lives as well. Sure, money is involved, but there's something underlying that would motivate you to do that.
Because I'm helping people, Joseph.
Joseph, I'll tell you why I do this, and maybe it's more in line with what you think, but I do it because I was a Christian for 35 years, and it affected me deeply. And when I found out that it wasn't true and became absolutely convinced that Christianity is a fiction, I was pissed, and I wanted to take action against it and try to talk other people out of it, because at that point in my life, I wasted my entire life within it. And right now, everyone that I know in real life that I don't know online, like on a channel like this, everyone I know in real life is a Christian, and they don't listen. They don't want to have a dialogue. It is frustrating as fuck. And I live in a culture that is predominantly Christian. Christians everywhere. There's churches in some areas on every corner. I live in a rural area. Like, being an atheist here is a real problem. Like, if my small town of 200 people were to find out I'm an atheist, like, I'd be a marked man, and that's wrong. I shouldn't have to be ostracized and an evil person and seen as being a problem just because I don't believe in Christianity anymore. See, I do it because, like, somebody needs to do it, because very, very few people are doing it. Only 5% of our population will confirm the title atheist. Now, there's a lot more that don't believe in God, but atheists are seen as a problem. They're seen as evil people, and that is wrong. So I do my part to fight that.
Man,
now, if that means that Christians can apply Romans 1 to me and say I've got a depraved mind and I just hate God, fine. That's their opinion. They're clearly wrong. They don't know my heart.
I mean, also, we've had some pretty fascinating conversations today too. And Joseph, you're pretty high up there on the fascinating conversations I've had, because you have some pretty unique takes. I'm really appreciative of you taking the time to have this call with us.
Wow, this is not the first time I've heard. I mean, I've always in my mind thinking, am I making a dent? Because, like I said, I like to listen and then hear and then respond, because you both have it's like you got parallel lives, but it's also like a different trajectory at the same time.
And we're different people.
We're different people. And that to me is what God made us to be. And I understand being amongst a lot of Christians. Most of them, they don't like me so much because I like atheists. I love them. And because I love gay people too. Right? That seems to be, oh, we love gay people too. No, you don't love, we don't like their lifestyle. You don't like who they are. It's not a lifestyle. I choose to be straight. I don't choose to like women. If you was to say, I don't love your lifestyle as a straight person, and that would be like saying you don't approve of me. So you're attacking me, but also gaslighting me by saying you love me. So I understand how it goes. And same thing with atheists, right? You are seen as the bane of the earth. You are seen as literally Bane of Batman. And they don't like you either. They'll tell you to your face that they do. But the fact that you have fear for your own life, being amongst the very community that you thought was behind your back for 35 years, that is not of God. And that is the same issue that Jesus himself dealt with, because he wasn't a Christian. There was other people who came after him who said, we're going to call ourselves Christians. He never wanted that. He came to dismantle all that. Priests and all of that, turn on the money tables, and we don't get rid of religion. We can have a direct relationship with God. That was the whole point of him being here. But then people turned around and made him a god, made him, deified him, and all these other things that he never came here to do, that God never sent him here to do. So in the same way, he sends people like you to talk to people who are batshit out of crazy out of the mind when it comes to God this, God that, the Bible. So you say, I don't believe in the Bible or the Christianity, and I agree with you. I don't agree with it either, and I don't say that in a flippant way, like how some people say, "Oh, I'm non-denominational too." So I can relate. No, when I go deeper with these people, those non-denominational people, they don't like me a lot. There's been a lot of screaming matches. I was like, wow, I'm just saying that God loves everybody. He also loves gay people. He loves atheists. What do you mean? They're going to go to hell. I know that's what it says in the scripture, but because me and God, we have like this thing. He's telling me, yeah, man wrote some of these things that wasn't supposed to. They're assassinating my character. That's not the nature of God. And so I understand the truth, not fully. I'm still learning. And that's why I come to you guys to not to sharpen what I have or what I believe, because what I believe doesn't matter. I'm more interested in what you guys believe, how you think, how you feel, your experiences, so that way I can have a better understanding, so I can grow as a person in my relationship to God, so that way I can reach more people like yourself. Not by antagonizing you, not by gaslighting you, not by pushing you into a corner and forcing you to fight against the world, but by literally inviting you the way that Jesus did. And I don't think a lot of Christians do. I don't. That's a lie. I know most of them don't do. They believe they do. In their head, I'm helping you by screaming at you on the streets, by telling you this is going to happen to you. But you're not God. But you're giving me judgment. So you imagine, you got people today judging people like yourself, atheists, gay people, the LGBT and queer community. Then how much more were they doing it in the ancient times? The people who wrote the scribe, the people who wrote the scripture, they're human, they're flawed like the rest of us. They can be inspired by God, but they can still have biases. They can still have misconceptions like the rest of us. So I can't go off scripture alone. I have to go by God. God has revealed to me that actually gay people are just as, I created them just as much as straight people. Oh, wow, that's okay. Makes sense. I never had an issue with them, but it seems like a lot of people hate them because they're gay, because that's what the scripture says. Thank you for clearing that up. Oh, atheists, yeah, they don't like, it's not that they don't like me per se. They have things against the Christian ways of doing things and how the world, they say they're spiritual, yet they are hypocrites. They do the opposite of everything. It's like,
Hey, Joe,
I'm sorry,
I'm,
go on.
I'm sorry to have to cut it short, but we've been on for almost 3 hours tonight. So I know we could keep talking for a really long time, but we gotta bring the stream to an end, unfortunately. So
I wake up at 4 a.m. for work, so I gotta go.
Yeah, and I'm up in the 5 o'clock hour. So we really appreciate you calling in tonight. It was a great conversation. We probably agree on a lot more than we think we do. So you are welcome to join us any week. It is every Tuesday now. So again, thanks for your call. We're going to go ahead and let you go. I got some announcements to run through real quick, and then we're going to call it a night. So
thank you, Joseph. Appreciate the conversation, sir.
Yep.
You take care, Joseph. All right. I know you're getting tired. I am too. So
sorry. I think it's easy to tell that I was getting tired because I was just letting him go on and on because I was just like, okay.
I know. I was looking for an opening, but I didn't want to be rude. So
he was preaching at that point, which is fine, I guess. But at the same time, like, all right, come on, man. We're not even talking about God wanting suffering.
Right. But hey, I'm doing it for him. Anyway, so I've got a list of announcements I've got to go through because I promised Ellen I would. So I'll see if I can get through these.
Oh, go ahead.
In a logical fashion. So we have Life After Faith tomorrow night. This is all on Skeptic Haven. Next week's episode, we are going to be right back here at 5 o'clock Central and 6 o'clock Eastern time. I don't have the topic handy right now. I think it's going to be about immortality. So we're going to be discussing the pros and cons of living forever. So that should be an interesting conversation. Go ahead and check out the Unravelation series on Ellen's channel, The Unraveler. He's having a debate on Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern time against a guy named Carrington Bridges. That is going to be on a channel called 21st Century Mind. And the topic of that debate is there sufficient justification for the Christian worldview? Obviously, Ellen is going to be taking the negative. There is not sufficient justification. So make sure you check that out, 2 p.m. Eastern time on 21st Century Mind. We want to thank our Patreon members and our YouTube members and the Skeptic Haven crew. They make this show possible. They moderate the chat. They post all this on their channels. So thank you to Skeptic Haven. Also, like and subscribe. We are almost up to 4,000 subscribers. You could be the one that pushes us up over 4K. So please, if you haven't subscribed, go ahead and do it. It'll help us out a lot. Let's see here. I should put up some of our banners here. Drew Beckius and Janice Selby on Life After Faith that I had just mentioned. It is a Skeptic Haven show. Fighting for your life after trauma.
Ooh.
And then we have got, we already mentioned, Is There Sufficient Justification for the Christian Worldview? Ellen Bondar versus Carrington Bridges, 21st Century Mind. Check that out. And Ellen is doing his Unravelation series. So be sure and watch his episode before our Deconversionist episode. It'll be the same topic. So he's going to be priming the audience for that. Okay. Well, everybody, thanks for watching. This is going to round out the show tonight. And our closing line that I can't forget to say is, every Christian has their own version of Christianity, and we are here to unravel your conversion. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.